Hey everyone, welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. I'm here to share real-life stories about encounters beyond our world that might help you relax and drift off. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. The Nevada desert can be a lonely place, especially late at night. I was driving east on Highway 50, hauling concrete forms from Sacramento about an hour past Ely. Early March, and the temperature had plummeted after sunset. The wind swept across the flats, constant and cold. No other headlights in sight for miles. This route was familiar to me. Just empty miles of sagebrush, with a wide bend where the desert briefly opens up before narrowing near the Pancake Range. No towns around. Austin barely counts as more than a gas station and diner. Around mile marker 132, something caught my eye. Two dim, almost amber-colored lights in my rearview mirror, about 100 yards back and low to the ground. Not typical headlights. At first, I thought it might be someone driving with fog lights, but these lights stayed exactly the same distance behind me, like they were matching my speed precisely. I tapped the brakes to check. Nothing changed. The road was straight, with no real shoulder, just a soft drop-off into sand. I planned to use one of the rare gravel cutouts to let them pass. But 5 miles later, they were still there, not gaining, not falling back. I tried the radio, channel 19, then 13, then 9. No response, just static. No truckers, no chatter. That's when a strange pressure started building behind my eyes, similar to the feeling you get from driving at high altitude. I cracked the window. Sharp, dry, cold air rushed in. The lights behind me blinked once, not like a signal, just a single pulse, then returned to their steady glow. Another mile passed. The desert to my left looked flat enough to pull into, but something kept me moving forward. I hit the brakes again, harder this time. Downshifted, let the truck slow. The lights behind me matched my pace, holding steady at that same 100-yard distance. Something stirred in my gut. Not quite fear, but that uneasy stillness when you sense something's off but can't pinpoint what. A cutout appeared maybe a minute later. Wide enough for 2 trucks if you lined up tight, with gravel packed down solid. I turned in and let the truck roll to a stop, hazards blinking. Scanning the mirror, nothing followed me in. I leaned over, checking the passenger side. The road was empty. Those lights had vanished. I killed the engine and stepped down into the dust. Wind whispered across the open plain. Walking back along the trailer, I scanned toward the highway. No lights, no tail lights, no engine noise, just darkness and the soft hiss of wind through brush. Crouching, I checked the sand near the cutout's edge. No tire tracks. Not mine, not anyone else's. I stood listening, then climbed onto the cab's step and turned a full circle, surveying the land. Nothing moved. No distant lights, just a faint orange glow low on the horizon from the last town. Back in the truck, I locked the doors and restarted the engine. The dash clock read 12:42. I could have sworn only 5 or 10 minutes had passed since pulling over, but it had been 12:17 when I last saw a mile marker. Easing back onto the road, no other vehicles passed me for the next 2 hours. Outside Eureka, I stopped at a 24-hour Sinclair for coffee. I asked the cashier about late-night construction crews or convoy movements through the basin. She shook her head. Nobody worked nights out there, too remote. By morning, I reached my drop in Ely. The receiver asked if I'd stopped somewhere. I was nearly an hour behind schedule. Checking my logs revealed nothing unusual. No timestamps out of place, no GPS flags for long stops. Yet I remembered everything clearly. The gravel, the cold, that strange roadside moment. I was out in the desert with my girlfriend Jenna, boondocking in a 19-feet Lance trailer. 2 nights of off-grid camping, no reception, just us in the wilderness. We'd spent the evening grilling hot dogs and playing gin rummy until exhaustion set in. The night was crystal clear, stars so bright the Milky Way was visible without effort. Jenna had commented on how dense the starscape looked before we fell asleep. Something woke me in the dark. An unnatural silence had descended. The trailer felt different, colder than when we'd gone to bed. I reached for the digital clock above the bed. Dead. No display, no power. My phone was similarly unresponsive, just a black screen. The trailer's systems were completely shut down. The vent fan was silent, no soft hum, no air movement. The blue LED on the smoke detector was dark. Even the little fridge and inverter panel showed no signs of life. Jenna stirred slightly but didn't wake. I grabbed my Casio watch, the one I'd worn continuously for a year. It read 4:17, but the digital screen was dark and the second hand frozen in place. Days later, back in Reno, I reviewed the cam footage. Everything appeared normal initially. My truck, the road, nothing behind me. But for 12 minutes, the video became strangely blurry, like a heat distortion. From 12:30 to 12:42, only the sound of idling engine and wind could be heard. No tire tracks were visible in the footage. We'd been camped just north of the Mojave Preserve on one of those unmarked dirt roads. No alcohol, no drugs, just a quiet night under an impossibly bright sky. Now, something inexplicable had happened during those missing moments. I grabbed Jenna's Fitbit from the hook. 4:17 showed on the screen, frozen and lifeless. No backlight, no pulse readout. I shook her awake, and she quickly sat up when I explained nothing was working. She checked her phone, the flashlight by the sink, even the battery-powered lantern under the bench. Nothing. Strangely, the batteries weren't drained or hot. They just seemed to not exist. We stepped outside into the desert night. The cold wasn't like normal weather. It felt more like an absence of everything. My bare feet touched sand and grit. Above us, the stars looked wrong, sharp and completely still, like pinpricks in black paper. No twinkling, no movement. The desert always has a subtle shimmer, but this felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Behind the trailer, a soft blue-white light caught Jenna's eye. Low to the ground, not a beam, but a dull glow, maybe 200 feet away, near some rocks. I whispered, "Is that a car?" No response from her. I moved around the trailer's side, but boulders blocked most of the view. The light didn't pulse or flicker, it just hovered where the earth met the sky. After a minute of watching, it vanished instantly. The moment it disappeared, a strange sound followed. Not mechanical, not wind, but a deep pressure. A silent hum pressed against our chests for about 5 seconds before fading. Back inside the trailer, Jenna locked the door, even though we were 50 miles from anything. The stove light remained dead. Something made me pull back the curtain for one last look. 3 small lights now dotted the distant horizon, perfectly spaced over the brush, as if watching. 2 blinked out slowly, with one lingering slightly longer before it too disappeared. We didn't sleep. We just lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, holding hands. 4:17 said nothing had changed. Hours later, the fridge compressor kicked on without warning. The fan started spinning, and the LED on the inverter flickered back to life. Jenna's Fitbit vibrated once, then lit up. It was 6:49 a.m. The clock above the bed reset itself to 12, blinking steadily. Outside, the sun crept up behind the ridge. Everything looked untouched. No tracks, no lights, no signs of disturbance. But every device, see with the clock, the watch, Fitbit, my phone, had been frozen at 4:17 until they powered back. None of them recorded any activity between 10 p.m. and that moment. I checked the trailer. Battery status was full, solar panels working. No apparent reason for a total shutdown like that. We packed up after breakfast and left. We didn't stay for the 3rd night. The place felt empty. Not quiet, just empty. In Barstow, we stopped at a diner. Jenna asked me not to bring it up again. I didn't argue. We both knew what we'd experienced. We still take trips, but not out there. Not anywhere that remote. Not anymore. I was camping near Factory in Utah, on BLM land with no trail. I'd parked the truck far off the dirt road and hiked about a 1/4 mile with my gear. I've done this before. Solo camping out there is different. Wide open, mostly flat, with weird hills and rock formations that make you feel like you're on the moon. That night in early October was clear and still. Cool, but not cold. I set up camp around 6:30, a small one-man tent and a fire pit made from a few rocks. I ate a dehydrated meal and watched the sky transform from orange to purple to pitch black. Stars emerged, the brightest I'd seen all year. No moon. I sat in my camp chair, sipping cheap whiskey from a metal flask, watching for shooting stars. My phone was off. No service anyway. The silence was indescribable. Your ears start inventing sounds to fill the emptiness. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps, but it was just wind or the sound of my own blood. After 11, I crawled into my tent. Sleep didn't come immediately. I remember lying there, hearing a strange buzzing in my head. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure, like being in a climbing plane. The night was eerily silent when I first noticed something strange. A deep rumble started far off, like a military jet flying low across the desert. I didn't think much of it initially, but the sound wasn't moving across the sky. Instead, it hovered directly above me, making my entire tent vibrate gently. Curious, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Immediately, something felt wrong. The rumble had vanished, replaced by absolute stillness. When I looked up, I saw an impossible sight. A perfect circular section of sky had been blacked out. This wasn't like clouds. It was a precise, motionless void that seemed to absorb all surrounding light. The edges of this dark circle were strange. They pulsed subtly like heat ripples, and the stars around the perimeter appeared unnaturally bright. A faint hum began inside my chest, and my skin felt tight. An overwhelming sense of exposure washed over me, as if I were under intense observation. Without warning, the black circle started to fade. Stars gradually bled back into the sky, one by one, until everything looked normal again. The moment it disappeared, the breeze returned, and I could hear my own breathing. I didn't return to the tent. Instead, I sat by the fire pit, watching the sky. Nothing else happened. Around 2 a.m., I crawled back inside and zipped up, but sleep never came. At first light, I broke camp quickly. No coffee, no breakfast, just rapid packing and a swift hike back to my truck. Something was immediately wrong when I arrived. The driver's side door was unlocked. I always locked my vehicle, especially when leaving it overnight in such a remote location. It was something I did without even thinking. I was driving west on Highway 36 through Kansas just past Belleville 2 summers ago, heading back from a spur-of-the-moment visit to my cousin in Missouri. As a radiology tech, pulling an all-nighter on a road trip didn't feel like a big deal. I left just after 9 p.m., with the sky still holding a bit of pink in the west and the air thick and warm. One of those nights where everything feels soft and slow. I had a few snacks, a Red Bull, and music playing low. Once I got past the last gas station in Mono, everything felt empty. Nothing but 2-lane road and cornfields stretching flat in every direction. About an hour in, I noticed a light behind me, not headlights. It was way higher up. At first, I thought it might be a plane, but it wasn't blinking, just a steady white point, kind of yellowish around the edges. I watched it in the rear view for a bit. It stayed dead center in the mirror, not drifting left or right, no matter how much the road curved. I thought maybe it was just an illusion like Venus or something bright low in the sky, but it felt wrong. I kept driving. 20 minutes later, it was still there, same size, same spot. Not getting smaller like a plane flying away would. Not moving at all, really. I tapped the brakes to slow down and see if the light would move relative to me. It didn't. I drove out of there fast, bouncing all over the road. I kept checking the rear view like I expected someone to follow. There was nothing, just that endless empty landscape behind me. I didn't stop until I hit Hanksville, pulled into a gas station, filled up, used the bathroom, and sat in the truck for a long time with the AC blowing. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls, just a weird notification saying SIM error for a few seconds before it fixed itself. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how precise that black circle was. Perfectly round, no blur at the edges like geometry, like a hole in the sky. It's muscle memory now. Nothing was missing. Glove box was still closed. Cooler was untouched in the bed. But the cab smelled weird, like static almost, like the way old electronics smell when they overheat. I haven't camped alone since. I kept driving, the road stretching out endlessly before me, empty and dark. My side mirror held something strange, a light that seemed to follow me, always perfectly centered, never moving. Every time I tried to look directly at it, it vanished. But in the mirror, it was unmistakably there. A weird sensation started creeping through my body. Something felt off. I killed the music and listened. Just the hum of tires, a whisper of wind, the soft rattle of the cooler in the back seat. I tilted the mirror up, unable to look at it anymore. The landscape rolled past, a lonely grain elevator with its blinking red light, a closed gas station looking forlorn in the night. Then more cornfields, more darkness. Somewhere near Norton, around 11, I pulled into a small gravel picnic area. Just a simple loop with a trash bin and a metal table under a pavilion. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and scanned the sky. There it was, a faint light hovering just above the eastern horizon, unmoving, unblinking. I stared, but my eyes kept drifting away. It was weirdly difficult to focus, almost like the light was deliberately making itself uninteresting. After maybe 10 minutes, I climbed back into the car. 20 minutes later, I glanced at the side mirror. The light was back, slightly brighter. The car suddenly felt claustrophobic. Every dashboard squeak, every tire crackle seemed amplified. The air felt thick, heavy, as if we were climbing even though the ground was flat. I switched off the AC and rolled down the windows. That's when I noticed something bizarre. No bugs. Not a single moth or beetle had splattered my windshield. In Kansas summer, that was impossible. Normally, you'd be sandblasting insects with every mile. But now, nothing. I was parked just off Groom Lake Road around midnight, late October of last year. Nothing special, just needed to get away from everything. I'd driven out from Kingman for the weekend and done the Area 51 tourist route before, the usual photo by the warning sign. But this time I planned to just stay put for a few hours and watch the sky. I brought a folding chair, some snacks, a cheap binocular from a pawn shop, and a blanket. With no cell signal out there, I downloaded star maps ahead of time and put my phone in airplane mode. It was colder than expected, maybe low 40s, but the sky was crystal clear. No clouds, no moon, just an ocean of stars above me. I parked about 200 yards off the main dirt road on a pullout where the ground flattens out. No lights for miles. I turned off the engine, left the keys in. My rearview mirror was still clear. Then I saw the light. It was bigger, closer. I braked slightly, watching to see if it would shift, but it didn't. It remained locked in place, like it was being projected into the mirror, not actually out there in the sky. I started talking out loud just to hear my own voice. "It's probably just a helicopter," I said. Or, "There's a tower I missed." But nothing made sense. Helicopters move. Towers don't follow you across 2 counties. I pulled off again outside of Oberlin at another rest stop with a bathroom. I sat on the curb next to my car and smoked. Something I don't even do. I found an old pack in the glove box that belonged to my ex and just needed something to do with my hands. I couldn't bring myself to look at the sky. After 15 minutes, I got back in the car. I adjusted my seat so I couldn't see the mirror. I drove the rest of the way to the Colorado state line, hunched down, eyes on the road, ignoring the strange weight I felt behind me. By the time I got home, it was almost 4 in the morning. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a long time before going inside. The sky looked normal. The light was gone. Birds were chirping. A neighbor's sprinklers kicked on. I never saw it again. But for 2.5 hours, it followed me. Never speeding up, never slowing down, just hovering in that same exact spot in the mirror like it was waiting for something. The mountains surrounding me looked like cardboard cutouts propped against the stars at night, flat, without depth or texture. I'd been focusing my monocular on a cluster of stars near Cassiopeia when something caught my eye. A subtle flash, not from the sky, but from the ground. It wasn't bright, more like a momentary blink of lightning without sound. This flash came from the Papoose Range to the north, a dull orange, almost amber like a sodium lamp. Definitely not from a plane or car. When I lowered the monocular, something strange happened. The mountain ridge seemed to flicker like an old film reel skipping a frame. For a split second, I saw a shape behind or inside the mountain, large as a small stadium, angular, smooth, and symmetrical. Then the light vanished, and it was just mountains again. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Was it fatigue? A trick of vision? I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stared intently at that spot. 10 minutes passed. Silence. No movement. Suddenly, my car's dome light flickered on. The driver's side door was completely shut. I was sitting 10 feet away. No animals nearby. No wind. Yet the interior light glowed softly through the sealed windows. I walked over, opened the door, and checked inside. Everything was untouched. Keys remained in the cup holder. I closed the door and the light went out. Back behind the wheel, I watched the mountains through the windshield. Tiny, faint pulses flickered occasionally, like heat lightning without clouds. I turned on the radio. Nothing but static. Every single station, AM and FM, was dead air. I was camped out alone near Lake Jocassee in the Blue Ridge foothills. Early October brought a damp leaf mulchy smell to the air. Cool but not cold, with a clear sky and an almost full moon. I'd been hiking all day and pitched my tent around dusk just off one of the side trails. Nothing official, but a decent clearing under some pines. I'd packed light, just the basics. One-person tent, foam, pad, sleeping bag, stove, water bladder, and a small dry bag with food. After making some instant rice and tuna, I listened to a few songs on my phone, then zipped everything up and called it a night around 10. As always, I put my boots under the tent flap and tucked my pack inside at the foot of my sleeping bag to keep animals from chewing on anything. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets and leaves shifting in the breeze. It was quiet, but not silent. The usual woods noise surrounded me. Then, deep into the night, I woke up. I couldn't tell what time it was. My eyes were open, but I couldn't see anything at first. Everything was just white. Not bright white like a flashlight, but more like a heavy fog glowing from all directions. The entire inside of the tent was filled with it. No shadows, no corners, just light. And it was silent, completely, absolutely silent. That's what got me. Later, I was driving down Groom Lake Road, caught in the usual background fuzz. Something felt off. I turned the radio off and cracked the window an inch. Suddenly, I realized I couldn't hear anything. No insects, no wind, just dead, airless silence. I sat watching the mountains for 30 minutes, expecting them to stutter again, but they never did. The silence remained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind the ridgeline, something that wasn't part of the desert. Eventually, I started the car. Everything came on normally. No dashboard lights, no system errors. I drove slowly, glancing in the mirror frequently. Once I hit the highway, radio stations returned one by one. Static faded. Music came back. Talk shows popped up. The desert behind me looked like it always did, vast and empty. I've been out there a few times since. Never saw that flicker again. But I don't park near that stretch of mountains anymore. The morning light filtered through the trees as I slowly came to, feeling hot and cramped. Something was in my mouth. I coughed and realized my pack was half covering my face. My sleeping bag was tangled around my legs, and the camp stove was jammed against my ribs. Everything was inside the tent with me. Everything. The bear bag, which I'd carefully strung up 20 feet away before bed, was now lying across my chest. My muddy boots were wedged under my knees. The dry bag with food, fuel canister, and trekking poles, all of it was piled on top of me. It was as if someone had dumped all my gear inside and zipped the tent shut again. As I sat up, a pounding headache throbbed behind my eyes. My throat felt raw, like a severe dehydration hangover. When I unzipped the tent, the woods seemed normal again. Birds chirped, and a squirrel scurried through the trees. Stepping outside, I immediately noticed the bear bag rope. It was still tied to the same branch, but the knot was undone, and the line hung limp, almost touching the ground. The bag had been cut open with a single clean slice, not clawed or chewed, just a smooth cut. My boots caught my attention next. They were damp, as if they'd been dragged through wet grass, but there'd been no dew the night before. The tread was packed with an unfamiliar reddish mud, too fine and clay-like for this part of the forest. Earlier that night was a blur of strange sensations. I remembered trying to move, but everything felt slow and distorted. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no insects, not even my own breath. When I tried to speak, my jaw moved, but no sound came out. My limbs felt heavy, moving with an unnatural delay. I attempted to unzip the tent, but my hands passed through light as if the tent itself had become ethereal. The world around me had seemed to dim gradually, like a light being swallowed by darkness. Then everything faded out. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Miles of sandstone and sagebrush surrounded me, with nothing but a generator for company, about 100 miles from the nearest town. My phone was dead when I woke up. Earlier, it had been at 60% battery before I fell asleep, but now the screen was completely black. Even when I plugged in the solar pack, it wouldn't show the charging icon. Something felt off. I wasn't missing any time that I could tell. The morning sun seemed to be in its usual early spot, around 7 or 8. But my body felt like it had been through something, not quite catching up to the moment. Breaking camp, I noticed something strange just outside the clearing. About 30 feet into the brush, there was a small circular area, maybe 5 or 6 feet across. The ground wasn't trampled, just pressed down as if something heavy had rested there. No scorch marks, no tracks, just a perfect round patch where plants were bent outward in every direction. I searched for animal signs but found nothing. No fur, no droppings, not even broken branches. Just that quiet, weird circle in the middle of the woods. I hiked out before noon, skipping lunch and not looking back. At the trailhead, my phone finally powered on. No service, but the time showed 3:47 p.m., and the date remained unchanged. No lost days, no unexplained entries or photos. But when I opened the voice recorder, an app I never use, there was a new file from the previous night, exactly 1 minute long. I played it, blank. No voices, no background sound, just solid silence. Then it stopped. I deleted the file without thinking. Now I kind of wish I hadn't. I don't understand what it meant or how it got there. I haven't returned to that trail. I still camp, but only in groups. The tent went to Goodwill a few days later. Not because anything was wrong with it, but because it carried a faint, unfamiliar smell. Not dirt, not sweat, not plastic. Something colder, sterile. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe a weird dream made me thrash around and drag my gear without realizing. But that light, that silence, the inability to hear my own breath, that wasn't a dream. I was awake for that part. I know I was. The research station, nestled in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael swell, was designed for one person. Minimal everything. Tiny living quarters with an attached greenhouse where I worked cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. It was quiet, solitary work. That week, the weather hung motionless. No breeze, no clouds. The air felt stale, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. My greenhouse windows stayed wide open, yet the air remained completely still. Insects were scarce, making the heat feel different, heavy even after sunset. Strange occurrences began with the soil sensors. 6 custom Arduino-rigged devices buried in different greenhouse corners tracked temperature, moisture, and pH, transmitting data to my laptop every 10 minutes. Tuesday morning revealed a 5-hour data gap from midnight to just before 5 a.m. The system had completely flatlined before resuming normal operation. Initially, I suspected Wi-Fi issues, but my laptop remained online and the generator hadn't stopped. The timestamps confirmed this wasn't a power problem. Later that afternoon, I discovered an LED grow light with a warped, half-melted plastic casing, as if someone had taken a blowtorch to its edge. The light wasn't hanging straight, with wires pulled loose on one side. I replaced the light, attributing the damage to a potential wiring defect. But around 2 a.m. the next night, the sensor alarm chirped 3 short beeps, signaling a pH drop below 4.0, an unprecedented acid spike for that soil. The air carried a distinct burned dust smell, reminiscent of lightning striking near rock. Grabbing my flashlight and boots, I investigated the greenhouse. Unexpectedly, humidity enveloped me like a wave. I hadn't air-ed recently, and no rain had fallen for days. Yet the glass was completely fogged. Stepping inside, I froze. Every single plant had mysteriously transformed. Night had fallen when I finished my usual greenhouse routine. With notepad in hand, I'd done my rounds, checking roots on the gallium hybrids and misting the ferns. Everything seemed normal, but when I looked again, something was off. Every single pot had rotated, not knocked over or dragged, but gently swiveled, all facing inward toward the greenhouse's center. A bare meter-wide patch of soil sat where the sensors converged, a spot I'd intentionally left open for new specimens. The soil wasn't dug up, just smoothly pressed down, as if something had rested there. No prints, no marks, just a shallow depression. Above this spot, the glass ceiling bore a curious trace, a faint black smoky outline spreading in a foot-wide ring. The glass itself wasn't cracked, but had spider-webbed subtly at the mark's center. The metal framing around it looked warped, with a strange heat distortion visible at a microscopic level. I didn't investigate further. I simply backed out and locked the door. The next morning, I examined the greenhouse's time-lapse camera. Set to capture a still every half minute, it compiled daily composites. I opened the previous night's folder and started the video. Everything appeared normal until 12:47 a.m. Then the footage became strange. Static flickered in one frame. The next went completely black, followed by a blank white screen. The timestamp suddenly jumped forward 4 hours. Digging into the raw stills, I found every file between 1247 and 451 was corrupted. Pure digital noise. Running a recovery program revealed 437 missing or partial images. Scrolling through thumbnails, most were unreadable data fragments. A few showed brief color bursts, violet, pale green, suggesting a sudden light. One thumbnail hinted at a smooth metallic curve in the top right corner, too blurry to identify. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera, leaving it off. That day, the plants began behaving oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward as if trying to enclose something. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90-degree angles, pointing directly toward the central bare spot. I was working a contract gig near White Sands last September, west of Alamogordo. A civilian aerospace company hired me to assist with a high-altitude weather balloon test. Paired with Rob Lane, an ex-Air Force weather tech, our job was straightforward. Launch, monitor ascent, collect telemetry, and recover payload. I'd done similar missions before. Nothing exciting, just hot, quiet desert work. We arrived at the site around 5:30 a.m., greeted by clear skies, low wind, and open scrubland dotted with a few dirt roads and some fencing. Weeks later, back in the greenhouse, strange events began unfolding. I noticed the ferns weren't staying where I placed them. No matter how I rotated the pots, they'd mysteriously tilt toward the center. One evening, I moved a fern back to the bench's edge, only to find it tipped over again by morning. Determined to understand what was happening, I spent Thursday night sitting in the greenhouse, flashlight in my lap. Around 1:30, something unusual occurred. The temperature plummeted from 77 degrees to 61 degrees in under 5 minutes. The air felt charged, making my arm hair stand on end. LED lights flickered and then shut off completely. An eerie silence followed. 2 minutes? 10? I'm not sure. No generator hum, no wind, not even distant insect sounds. When I finally turned on my flashlight, the center spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were slightly tilted again. The next morning revealed burnt-out soil sensors. Their plastic casings were bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Oddly, my laptop and other greenhouse equipment remained untouched. I radioed in, citing a hardware malfunction and cutting the trip short. No questions were asked. Before leaving, I scooped a small soil sample into a sealed jar, now sitting on a shelf in my apartment. Initially dark red, it dried to a grayish color. A faint ring circles the jar's interior where the soil doesn't stick, almost like something pushed outward from the center. Occasionally, walking past, I catch a fleeting whiff of burned dust. The morning was quiet and still before sunrise. Our gear rustled softly against the gravel as we prepared. At 6:12, we launched the balloon, watching it catch the first light and drift almost motionlessly before beginning its slow climb. Everything proceeded normally at first. Over the next 40 minutes, the balloon rose to around 30,000 feet, with telemetry reporting steady wind speed, temperature, and barometric pressure. But around 6:52, our data feed started behaving strangely, first lagging, then freezing completely. The GPS locked up at 31,200 feet. Rob began checking connections, swearing under his breath, and rebooting the receiver. Suddenly he stopped, pointing at the monitor. "That's not right," he said. The waveform showed a repeating static spike across the spectrum, not random noise, but an almost rhythmic interference pattern. I stepped back to get a clearer view of the sky. The balloon was still visible, a tiny pale dot drifting upward. Then something flashed, a thin streak of white-blue light shooting from southwest to northeast, just above the balloon. It moved so quickly I could barely track it, vanishing as soon as I saw it. No sound, no trail. When I turned to Rob and asked if he'd seen it, he didn't respond. He was staring intently at the monitor. Moments later, the receiver shut down completely. Power remained on, but all data feeds died. Rob tried swapping the logging tablet, but nothing worked. The balloon's signal was gone. We stood in silence, scanning the sky as the sun broke the horizon, painting everything orange and gold. Where the balloon should have been, there was only open sky. Then we heard it, a low, smooth hum. Not mechanical like a jet or drone, but a deep tone seeming to come from nowhere. It lasted just seconds, barely perceptible. We were packing up our equipment after the balloon launch. Rob suggested we call it a day, and I didn't object. As we coiled cables and dismantled the antenna mast, I kept scanning the sky, half expecting another flash or a moving shadow. Nothing appeared, but an uneasy feeling lingered. The air grew eerily still, dead calm, without even a hint of wind. That was strange for our location, where breezes were typically constant. Our truck's antenna flag hung motionless, as if frozen in place. I checked the portable barometer and noticed the pressure had slightly increased, which was unusual since it normally drops as temperatures rise. Rob was uncharacteristically quiet during our return drive. Normally talkative and prone to cracking jokes, he now seemed preoccupied, repeatedly glancing in the rearview mirror like something might be trailing us. We arrived at the base station just before 9, where our supervisor Jeff was waiting. We reported that the balloon launch went smoothly initially, but we'd lost the signal around 30,000 feet and couldn't re-establish contact. When Jeff suggested tracking recovery via the backup beacon, Rob unexpectedly declined, surprising me, given his typical enthusiasm for payload recovery. His pale complexion suggested he'd witnessed something inexplicable. The next day I went out with a different technician to sweep the projected drop zone. We found absolutely nothing. No parachute, no payload. The equipment should have landed within a 5-meter radius, but it was as if it had vanished completely. A week later I asked Rob about what we'd experienced. He simply shook his head and stated, "Wasn't a plane, wasn't a satellite, and it sure as hell wasn't weather." That became my final balloon launch. Last October, I was deer hunting alone on the Utz Plateau in northern Utah. My cousin Tyler was supposed to join me but canceled due to family commitments. The weather was ideal. Cold mornings, clear skies, no fresh snow. I camped off a service trail, using an old, barely visible logging access point a few miles past the Forest Service gates. I was hiking northeast before sunrise, up early with coffee on my little stove. The landscape was a rugged mix of rocky slopes, pine forests, and small clearings, good hunting terrain. Around 7:30, I crossed a frozen creek and followed a narrow game trail winding up a ridge. About a quarter mile in, something caught my eye down the slope to my left. A strange reflection glinted about 50 yards away, not sunlight on snow, but a constant metallic shine. At first, I thought it was abandoned trash, maybe a discarded hubcap or broken cooler. But as I got closer, I realized this was something entirely different. A perfect silver sphere, roughly 3 feet wide, sat half buried at the base of a small rock outcrop. Its surface was smooth like brushed aluminum, with no seams, dents, or scratches. Strangely, the surrounding ground looked completely undisturbed, no drag marks, broken branches, or footprints. Frost covered nearby leaves and grass, yet none touched the sphere. When I reached out and touched it, the metal felt warm, warmer than the surrounding air. I crouched down, searching for any markings or indicators. Nothing. Just this inexplicable metal orb sitting impossibly in place. For 15 minutes I circled the sphere, trying to understand how it arrived here. No impact crater, no signs of falling. It seemed deliberately placed. I attempted to nudge it with my boot, but it remained firmly lodged in the soil. An odd sensation began to creep over me. Not illness, but a feeling of being watched. The air felt heavier, and an unnatural silence surrounded me. No birds chirped, no wind rustled. My ears felt stuffed like during a rapid mountain ascent. I tried to document the sphere with my phone, but the camera app wouldn't open. Restarting yielded a black screen. My GPS app froze completely, and I watched the battery plummet from 76.6% to 0 in seconds. My backup battery pack and reliable Garmin unit also failed, refusing to power on. Something was definitely not right. I was out hiking, tracking something through the wilderness, when I came across this weird sphere. My electronics started acting strange, like they were glitching out. I figured maybe it was a solar flare or something, though I'd never experienced anything like this before. Back at my tent, everything worked perfectly fine. Phone powered up, GPS reset, no problems at all. I even snapped a picture of my stove to check the camera. Maybe I'd just hit some bizarre dead zone, though that didn't quite explain what I'd seen. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept waking up, listening. The woods were unnaturally silent. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the usual rustling in the brush. Everything felt suspended, paused. Sunday morning, I decided to return to the spot and investigate further. I wanted a proper photo, maybe dig around the area a bit. But when I got back, the sphere was gone, completely vanished. The landscape remained unchanged. The split pine, rocky outcrop, frost-covered clearing, everything exactly as I remembered. No trace remained. No disturbed ground, no tracks, nothing to suggest anything had been there. Even the frost looked undisturbed right where the sphere had stood. I walked circles around the area, double-checking my landmarks. Same ridge, same pine, same sunlight angle. I knew this was the right spot. Something wasn't right. I packed up Camp B, 4 noon, and hiked out faster than usual. No breakfast, no coffee. I kept glancing behind me, feeling like something might emerge from the trees. Once I reached my truck, I drove straight to Vernal and checked into a cheap motel. I didn't want to spend another night out there. Since then, I've only told 2 people, Tyler and a hunting buddy. Neither believed me. I get it. If someone told me this story, I'd be skeptical too. But I know what I experienced. I touched that sphere. Its smooth, warm metal against the freezing air, like it was waiting for something. Something I still can't explain. Near the end of the block, a black car was parked by the curb. Something inside demanded my attention. 2 men sat in the front seats, dressed in black suits and old-fashioned top hats. What struck me wasn't their clothing, but their faces, or rather, the complete lack of them. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin, as if someone had meticulously erased every detail. I froze momentarily before quickening my pace. Curiosity battled with my instinct to keep moving. When I finally glanced back, the car had vanished. No lights, no engine sound, no tire marks. Just an empty street shrouded in fog. Who those men were or why they were there, I'll never know. The memory has haunted me ever since. That night at the old airfield wasn't planned. It was one of those spontaneous decisions. Located near Milltown in western Kansas, the place had been shut down for years. Nothing but cracked runways and empty hangars. I'd driven past it countless times, thinking it might be perfect for night sky photography. The lack of light pollution meant stars would shine incredibly bright. I arrived around 10 p.m. on a Friday. The wind was light but steady and the sky clear, that crisp, dry air typical of early spring nights. My old college camcorder, long since replaced by phone cameras, sat mounted on a tripod at the runway's edge. I was filming the horizon, hoping to capture something interesting. Meteors, satellites, anything unusual. After about an hour of watching and waiting, something caught my eye. Halfway up the sky, strange lights moved slowly, pulsing in a way that defied explanation. They weren't planes or helicopters. No standard navigation lights, no sound. Just round lights drifting in inexplicable patterns. They would flicker, then vanish completely, only to reappear slightly displaced. Initially, curiosity overwhelmed any sense of fear. I zoomed in with the camcorder, desperate to understand what I was seeing. The night was quiet, broken only by the strange lights that seemed to shift positions, almost as if they were observing me. Something felt off. The air grew colder, different somehow, though no wind stirred. A movement caught my eye near the rusted chain-link fence separating the runway from the old service road. A man stood there, dressed in a black suit that looked completely out of place in this deserted location. No tie, just a black jacket and slacks, perfectly still in the shadows. I turned off the camcorder screen and squinted, trying to get a better look. "Hey, can I help you?" I called out. Silence. "Are you lost?" The man didn't respond or move. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. Without a sound, he stepped through the fence. No climbing, no noise. He simply appeared closer, expressionless and silent. I raised my camcorder but didn't start recording. Something about him made me hesitate. 6 feet away, he stopped and slowly reached into his jacket pocket. A single piece of paper emerged, which he handed to me. I looked down, blank, completely empty. No writing, no symbols, nothing. When I looked up to ask what this meant, he was gone. No footprints, no sound, no indication he'd ever been there. The sky, too, was empty. The lights had vanished as if they'd never existed. I stayed out a while longer, trying to process what had just happened. Back in my car, I examined the paper again. Still blank. At home, I checked the camcorder footage. It captured the strange moving lights and the sudden silence when the man appeared. But bizarrely, there was no record of the paper or the moment he handed it to me. I told a few friends, but they dismissed it as a prank or my imagination. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. I've never returned to that airfield. But sometimes, when I'm outside after dark, I catch glimpses of lights moving just beyond my vision, watching. The evening was cool and crisp, typical of early autumn. I was out on the dock behind my house, trying to capture the emerging stars with my phone camera. Everything seemed normal, quiet, peaceful. But then something caught my eye. Hovering just above the lake's surface was a dark, solid shape. It wasn't moving like anything familiar. Not a bird, not a plane. No blinking lights, no sound. Just a sharp, matte black silhouette against the sky. I zoomed in with my camera, studying it closely. For a few minutes, the shape remained perfectly still. Then it began to drift sideways, slowly and deliberately. Suddenly, without warning, it shot straight up and vanished into the darkness. I blinked, feeling a mix of unease and curiosity. The next morning, a black car appeared at the end of my driveway. An older model from the early 2000s, it looked pristine, clean without a single dent, no license plate. Stranger still, there were no tire tracks or footprints around it. The gravel looked untouched. I checked the windows, empty. No keys in the ignition. I thought maybe a neighbor's visitor had parked overnight, but something felt off. Each morning, the car returned to the same spot, unchanged. I left notes that went unnoticed, unmoving. Days passed. The car remained a silent, mysterious presence. Then one evening, while sitting on my porch after dinner, I heard footsteps on the gravel. When I looked up, something was about to happen. The night was crisp and clear in late October, perfect for astrophotography. I'd been scouting this ridge in northern Vermont for weeks, a secluded spot about 20 minutes from home with no streetlights and an unobstructed eastern view. My camera was set up on a tripod, settings dialed in. 30-second exposures, ISO 600, ready to capture the Milky Way's trailing movement. This was more than just a hobby. Astrophotography had become my escape, a way to step back and feel connected to something larger than myself. The stars that night were incredibly vivid, sharp pinpoints of light against the deep darkness. Days later, strange things started happening. A black car began appearing every morning, though I never saw who was driving. My phone would glitch when I tried photographing the nearby lake, showing static or freezing unexpectedly. Then one night, I looked up and saw a man standing at the end of my driveway. He wore a simple black suit, his face mostly shadowed by streetlight. When I approached and asked if he needed help, he spoke 4 cryptic words, "The water remembers." Before I could respond, he vanished into the darkness. Late one night around 3 a.m., I noticed soft blue lights flickering over the lake. When I tried capturing them with my phone, the screen went black. By the time I looked up again, the lights had disappeared. Late night sounds became unsettling. Sometimes I'd hear a faint humming from the water, but it would stop whenever I went outside to investigate. The man never returned. The car stopped appearing. Yet something remained, a persistent feeling of being watched, as if something lurked just beneath the lake's surface. Those 4 words echoed endlessly. The water remembers. I was shooting film near Polaris with an old Canon AE1, using some expired Kodak Ektachrome from a thrift store. Photography lets me slow down and be patient, capturing moments without rushing. After an hour, I packed up and headed home. The next morning, I developed the film in the campus dark room. As a photography major, I have access to the department's lab, which is open almost around the clock. The space is a cramped basement with concrete walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the familiar smell of developing chemicals. I find it oddly comforting and quiet. When I hung the first film strips to dry, the star trails looked great. But something caught my eye on one roll. Sharp geometric streaks cut across the sky above the ridge, not random, but deliberate. These weren't airplane or satellite trails. They looked like precise patterns drawn in light, shapes I'd never seen before. I examined the negatives again under the light, blinking and wondering if it was a processing error or a scratch. Printing a few frames in the enlarger only made the shapes more intriguing. Triangles, diamonds, and what seemed like a hexagon glowed faintly white. Unlike the blurred stars, these shapes remained sharp and rigid. My friend Claire, also a photography student, suggested it might be light graffiti or a film glitch. We agreed, but the images lingered in my mind. I returned to the ridge the next night, hoping to capture more, but cloudy skies prevented another attempt. Days later, I visited the dark room to make more prints. Only the janitor, Mr. Carver, was there. He gave me a strange look, like he was holding something back. When I reached into my locker, I discovered something unsettling. The prints with those geometric streaks were gone. Not just a few, but the entire set had vanished. I worked as a night security guard at the Mount Kelsey Observatory for almost 3 years. It's this remote facility about 40 miles outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, up on a ridge surrounded by pine trees. One afternoon, I got an email on my school account. No subject, just a sentence. "You've seen too much light lately." It was from an address I didn't recognize. I replied asking who it was, but got no answer. That night, I thought I saw a shadow standing outside my apartment. When I looked closer, it vanished. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the streetlight. A few nights back, some men had come by after hours. They were wearing suits, black suits that looked real official. They asked me strange questions about lights, long exposures, and capturing things that weren't supposed to be captured. I didn't know what to tell him. I froze for a second. What did they want? They just wanted to know if anyone had been down here taking photos of the sky. Said something about too much light and things better left unseen. I don't think they liked the idea of people poking around. Over the next week, strange things kept happening. My phone battery would drain fast, even though I barely used it. I'd catch flickers of movement outside my window, but when I looked, there was nothing. Once while driving home late, my headlights briefly dimmed and then returned to normal. I stopped going to the ridge for a while. I didn't tell anyone else, not even Claire. Then one night, while walking back from the campus library, I saw a black sedan parked under a street lamp a block from my apartment. 2 men inside were dressed in dark suits. They didn't get out. As I passed, their headlights briefly flickered, and I swear I caught a glimpse of one of them watching me. I hurried home and locked every door and window. Eventually, I moved all my negatives and prints to a safer place just in case. I never saw those men in black again, but I always felt like someone was watching, waiting. I still don't know what those shapes were on my film or why those men showed up, but I stopped photographing the night sky after that. It didn't feel right anymore. The observator, he stood alone in an isolated landscape, its remote location ideal for the specialized telescopes housed within. My night shifts were long, running from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and typically quiet. I'd patrol the grounds, check the perimeter, and keep watch for any unexpected visitors or wildlife. That night in mid-October was clear and cold, with a thin moon barely illuminating the darkness. Around midnight, something caught my eye. 2 bright spheres hovered silently over the east ridge, not far from the facility. They weren't like typical aircraft lights. These were steady, intense orbs glowing a pale blue-white. Initially, I thought someone might be playing around with spotlights, but these lights behaved differently. They remained perfectly still, side by side, about 50 feet apart just above the tree line. Grabbing my flashlight and binoculars, I studied them carefully. For nearly 5 minutes, they hung motionless without making a sound. I radioed the control room to report the unusual sight. They instructed me to observe but not approach. Then, without warning, the spheres began to rise. Slowly at first, then accelerating, they climbed straight up, faster than any helicopter or drone I'd ever seen. Within seconds, they vanished into the night sky. The rest of my shift was spent alternating between monitoring the property cameras and walking the grounds, searching for any explanation. I found nothing. No footprints, no vehicles, no evidence of any disturbance near the ridge. When I filed my report, I tried to sound matter-of-fact, describing the 2 bright lights that hovered silently before disappearing. The next morning changed everything. My manager, Jeff, was waiting for me, unusually tense and watching the door nervously. Before I could ask what was wrong, 2 men walked in, dressed in a way that immediately set me on edge. The observatory felt strangely quiet that night. 2 spheres hung motionless in the sky, hovering in the same spot as before. No wind stirred the trees, no wildlife sounds broke the silence. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Behind me, a low electrical hum buzzed through the air. When I glanced at the spheres, something odd happened. One seemed to flicker for a split second, almost like a digital glitch. The sight made my stomach twist uncomfortably. I'd never witnessed anything like it. Earlier that day, 2 Homeland Security agents had visited. They wore black suits and carried themselves with a cold, calm authority. No names, no personal introductions, just thick metal badges with numbers, 0473 and 8921. Their eyes were unnerving. They never blinked, staring straight ahead as if deliberately concealing any emotion. Jeff, my colleague, had brought them to speak with me about my report. The agents asked the same questions I'd already answered. What I saw at the observatory, the details of the spheres, their movement, the unusual silence. They didn't take notes, just nodded and exchanged occasional glances. Jeff stayed nearby, but remained mostly silent. After about 20 minutes, they left without explanation. Just before exiting, I caught a whispered fragment about restricted airspace and non-conventional aerial phenomena. The encounter left me with a strange, unsettling feeling. The rest of that day felt off. Security camera feeds showed intermittent static, and Jeff seemed to avoid my gaze, as if he knew something I didn't. Now, watching the spheres rise slowly toward the main telescope dome, I tried to radio the control room, but my voice came out garbled, overwhelmed by loud static. The lights moved with an unnatural, deliberate precision. Something was definitely not right. Weeks passed, and eventually the place felt normal again. But I never forgot those eyes. At work, the security cameras occasionally caught something moving just out of frame. Too fast to be a person, too vague to be an animal. I started noticing odd little things around the observatory, like faint footprints leading nowhere or small patches of scorched grass by the equipment sheds. I told Jeff about these strange occurrences, but he just shrugged, saying it could be animals or people messing around. Still, the unease stuck with me. The agents who didn't blink, the spheres that hovered silently in that strange stillness in the forest. They haunted my memories. After that night, the spheres stopped appearing. The strange thing was the agents never came back. Jeff said nothing more about them. I kept working the night shifts, but every time the wind died down and the sky went completely quiet, I wondered if the spheres might come back. I don't have answers, just a bunch of moments I can't explain. And I guess that's enough to keep me looking over my shoulder every once in a while. My name's Lisa Moreno, and I live in a small cabin on the outskirts of Ashford, Washington. It's about as close to the wilderness as you can get without completely disappearing from the map. I've always been the kind of person who likes to record stuff, weird stuff, strange things that don't add up. It's a hobby, or maybe an obsession. I was on the dock just after midnight filming. The lake was flat, the kind of still that swallows sound whole. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air had that damp, heavy feeling you get right before rain starts. I was waiting for those lights to show up again, the weird ones I'd noticed the past few nights. Those lights first appeared last week. I was out here just messing around with my phone's camera when these faint glimmers started flickering over the water, moving in patterns that didn't match anything natural. No planes, no bats, no fireflies. They looked like small orbs just hovering and then zipping in ways that didn't make sense. I figured I'd catch them on video and maybe post it somewhere later. Not to prove anything. I'm not that delusional, but just because it was strange. That night, I got some footage. The lights pulsed in a loose circle, maybe 10 minutes, then vanished without a trace. I couldn't sleep that day or the next. Jamie and I were drinking coffee when I showed him the video clips. The lake footage was strange, something moving silently, darting up and down with an almost deliberate quality. He's more of a hiking guy, but he suggested it might be a drone. I wasn't convinced. The movements seemed too fluid, and drones don't typically hide in fog. After that, I kept returning to the lake, hoping to capture more evidence. Weird things started happening. One night, while editing, the power flickered, just in my cabin. The lights dimmed and went out completely for about 10 seconds. When they returned, my laptop had frozen, despite being on battery power. My phone began acting up too. The battery drained unusually fast, GPS would randomly shut off, and the compass would spin wildly. These glitches happened most often near the lake. The night before everything changed, I decided to turn in early. Around 3 a.m., a sound at the door woke me. I'd locked the porch door this time, unusual for me since no one ever comes around at night. The noise wasn't a knock, but a soft, dragging shuffle across the wooden porch. Heart racing, I looked through the peephole. A man dressed entirely in black stood there, jacket, pants, boots. No hat, no gloves. His face was shadowed, but he seemed to be staring directly at the door. Motionless, like a statue, I whispered, "Who are you?" Silence. Just as I was about to call 911, I noticed something on the floor, a photo. I cracked the door open, reached down, and picked it up. It was old, yellowed at the edges, like it had been carried for years. When I looked up, the man was gone. No footsteps, no sign of movement. The photo was of me, a childhood picture. 6 or 7 years old, smiling in the park, wearing the blue jacket my mom bought that winter. I turned it over. Nothing. I was driving back to California after helping my sister move to Austin with no intention of spending money on a motel. I've always been comfortable sleeping in my truck when needed. Somewhere along Route 62, not far from 29 Palms, but still a good distance out, I'd been driving for hours. My plan was to stop for the night after passing the last gas station in Parker. It was late, close to 1:30 in the morning, when I pulled off onto a dirt shoulder. The Mojave night surrounded me. No lights, no other cars, just vast emptiness. Stars dotted the sky, dry air hung still, and a low hum of silence filled the space. I cracked the driver's window a few inches, killed the engine, rolled my hoodie into a pillow, and reclined the seat. Sleep came quickly. I'm not sure what time I woke up, but darkness still blanketed everything. The sky had that pre-dawn feeling, technically morning, yet the sun hadn't appeared. Something stirred me, but not a sound or movement. Instead, an inexplicable feeling washed over me. Days later, I found myself haunted by strange occurrences. My phone would light up with calls from unknown numbers, never answered, never leaving messages. Lights on the lake flickered, and I felt watched, even inside the cabin. One evening, a soft tapping on the window revealed nothing when I looked. Cautious now, I started carrying a flashlight and pepper spray whenever I went outside. The origin of these events remained a mystery. Was the man connected to the lights or the weird glitches? What did he want to tell me with that photo? I showed the mysterious photo to Jamie, who examined it closely. "Where did you get this?" he asked. After hearing my story, he frowned. We agreed to keep it between us. Something had changed in me. I began noticing subtle, unsettling details. How fog rolls in too quickly, how power sometimes blinks in half a house, those quiet moments when the world feels paused. At night, looking over the lake, I'd catch glimpses of shapes moving just beyond the trees. The photo sits on my desk next to my camera. I haven't shown it to anyone else, not yet. The windows were strange when I woke up. Thick fog covered every single one, front windshield, side windows, even the tiny triangle in the back. But this wasn't normal condensation. Someone had wiped the glass from the outside with a wet rag, leaving wide, smeared streaks. The air had been bone dry when I parked, with no humidity or dew. Nothing made sense. I wiped a spot on the windshield with my sleeve. Clear. The fog was only on the outside. A weird feeling settled in my stomach. My hand hovered near the dome light, but something felt wrong about turning it on. I didn't want to see what might be out there. Silence filled the cab, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. Slowly, I cracked open the door. Cold, dry air hit me immediately. Definitely not damp enough for this kind of condensation. I stepped out and closed the door gently. Hard-packed dirt and gravel crunched under my feet. No moisture anywhere. Walking a slow circle around the truck, I examined the windows. The fogging was even, with long swipes and wide arcs. Some spots had finger-like streaks, as if someone had tried to clean the windows from the outside. In the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert, I crouched down and looked under the truck. Nothing. No footprints, no marks in the dirt. The silence felt heavy, unnatural. Climbing back in, I locked the doors. A different smell hung in the air, faint but distinct, like old copper or ozone. I didn't notice it before falling asleep. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see movement. But the road remained empty. I turned the key, and the truck started up. I was camped out in the Nevada desert, just south of Bay, near an old gravel road. Headlights cut through the dirt and low shrubs as I pulled back onto the road without much thought. About 5 minutes later, something caught my attention. The radio display had completely reset. Time, presets, everything, as if the battery had been disconnected. I hadn't touched anything. My phone's clock read 5:42 a.m., but something felt off. The sky was still pitch black, not the early light you'd expect at that hour. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd lost track of time, or the mountains were blocking the sun. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I'd only intended to nap for a couple of hours, maybe 3 at most. I remembered parking around 1:30 a.m. and checking my phone at 1:47 a.m. before falling asleep. If it really was 5:42, nearly 4 hours had passed. Yet it felt like I'd just closed my eyes for a moment. I made it to 29 Palms a little after 6 with the sun finally rising. At a gas station, I grabbed a coffee and used the bathroom. While washing my hands, I noticed a thin red mark across my neck, higher near my jaw, almost like a pressure line from a tight seatbelt. But I'd only been wearing a hoodie with no tight collar. That's when everything started to unsettle me. The fogged windows, the wiped glass, the strange smell, the time discrepancy, the radio, none of it made sense. I kept searching for rational explanations. Maybe someone had messed with the truck while I slept. Maybe I just slept longer than I thought. Maybe the battery glitched. But I'd slept in that truck countless times in different places. I'd never seen windows fogged like this, especially not in the desert with no humidity, no breath inside, and no signs of anything around me. I drove straight home that day, stopping only for gas. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I thoroughly checked the truck. No damage, no missing items. Yet that faint metallic smell lingered, clinging to the fabric even with windows rolled down most of the way home. The next night, a dream, or maybe something more, haunted me. A bright white light, soundless and close, hanging above me. I'm still not sure if it was a dream or a memory from that night. One thing's certain, I haven't slept in the truck since. I was out in the desert, camping on a quiet road that winds through the hills. It's a place I know well, where silence reigns so completely you can hear absolutely nothing, not even a whisper of wind on calm nights. This particular evening in late April was cool but not cold, with a sky so clear it looked like black glass. I arrived around 6 p.m. and set up a simple camp in a small flat area nestled between some low rock formations. My setup was basic: a 2-person tent, sleeping bag, cooler, and backpack. I skipped making a fire to avoid drawing attention and had a jet boil for any hot needs. Cell signal was strong when I parked, but vanished quickly after hiking about a mile in. I spent the evening exploring a nearby ridge and returned to camp just as the sun was setting. A quick dinner of a granola bar and jerky, and I was in my sleeping bag by 10. Normally, camping out here means interrupted sleep. The desert gets cold, and every rock seems to press against your back through the ground pad. But this night was different. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, completely out. Then something woke me. Not a sound, not a movement, just that strange moment when your brain senses something's wrong before you're fully conscious. I checked my phone. 4:13 a.m., battery fine. Pulling up my GPS app, I was stunned to see my coordinates placed me roughly 2 miles northeast of where I'd parked. At first, I thought I must have marked my original spot incorrectly. I closed and reopened the app. Same result. My offline map showed my previous saved pins, including the on-E from that night. My location dot was definitely not where I remembered setting up camp. Everything looked exactly the same. The rocks, the flat stretch, the Joshua tree with my reflective marker, nothing had moved. My tent was in place, boots right where I'd left them. I checked the soft, dusty ground. Only my previous day's footprints were visible. No drag marks, no tire tracks, no animal prints, just absolute stillness. Barefoot, I stepped outside and slowly swept my flashlight around. The air was completely motionless, no wind. The stars hung silent and bright. The morning looked familiar, maybe a little dimmer as dawn approached, but something felt off. I stepped outside my tent, scanning the area for any disturbance. My gear appeared untouched. Pulling on my boots, I checked the GPS again. The dot remained 2 miles northeast of my original marker. I tried using the compass to retrace my steps, but something didn't add up. I knew I'd come from the west, slightly northwest, yet the GPS suggested a different route. Eventually, I stopped trying to rationalize the situation and just listened. The silence was overwhelming. No crickets chirped, no wind rustled, not even the faintest highway hum broke the stillness. Then a sound emerged, a soft pulsing noise from above. It wasn't directional, more like a diffuse presence hovering overhead, too subtle to pinpoint. I switched off my flashlight and gazed upward. Stars filled the sky, unchanged. For 5 minutes, I waited for some sign, some movement, but nothing happened. The hum seemed to slip away rather than fade, in a way that defies easy explanation. Returning to the tent, I remained fully dressed, periodically checking the GPS. The position stayed constant, yet something was fundamentally wrong. My tent hadn't shifted, but according to every map, I was nowhere near my original location. As dawn broke around 5:30, I climbed a nearby ridge to get my bearings. The road where I'd parked was nowhere in sight. The landscape looked similar but subtly different. Features existed, but not in their expected arrangement. Panic rising, I packed quickly and methodically. 2 hours of careful navigation, following the GPS route manually, finally brought me to my truck, parked exactly where I'd left it. Back home, a thorough map check confirmed my suspicions. The spot where I'd awakened was far too distant from my original campsite to be explained by simple disorientation. No trails, no service roads connected the two locations. Last March, in early spring, I was hiking with my buddy Kevin near Fort Wuka in southern Arizona. The weather was perfect, cool in the shade, warm in the sun. We'd explored a few trails that season, but this one was new. It sat just outside the restricted zone, technically public land, but pretty remote. Kevin's always been curious about boundaries. He likes getting close to fences, checking out signs without touching them. We parked off a dirt service road around 10:30 in the morning and hiked about 3 miles before stopping for lunch. Cell service was non-existent, which we expected. Kevin had downloaded offline maps, and I carried a Garmin as backup. We settled on a rocky ridge overlooking a long wash. The landscape stretched out empty, chaparral, low brush, and scattered moskite trees. The Dragoon Mountains were visible on one side, with the base perimeter distant on the other. After lunch, something changed. The world went silent. No wind, no bugs. The air felt strangely thick, like the moment before a monsoon. Except the sky was clear. As we packed up, my Garmin screen suddenly went black. Kevin looked up and mentioned his phone had died. Not just low battery, but completely unresponsive despite having 80% charge. We pulled out backup devices. Kevin's emergency flip phone, my pocket flashlight, his old Nikon camera. Nothing worked. All electro, nicks were dead, watches, phones, everything. Just silent, powerless devices. Then we heard it, a low sound. Not loud, but deep, more like pressure than noise. A barely audible hum that came in waves. I asked Kevin if he heard or felt it. He just nodded. We stood completely still, something holding us in place. Not fear, exactly. Just a sense that we weren't supposed to be there. Or maybe we were, and that felt worse. I don't camp in that area anymore. Not because anything chased us off or threatened us. Something about that night just felt different. The silence settled after the strange interruption. 5 or 6 minutes passed, and then everything just stopped. Kevin's phone buzzed, followed quickly by my Garmin lighting up. Everything seemed normal again, and we exchanged a nervous laugh, dismissing it as possible solar interference. Checking our phones, we confirmed the time was correct and battery levels unchanged. But something was off. Kevin spotted new photos in his gallery that he was certain he hadn't taken. 8 images, all time-stamped between 12:41 and 12:46, exactly during our weird blackout moment. The first few shots were blurry and angled strangely, pointed vaguely upward at the sky. Then things got more unsettling. One photo showed Kevin from behind, capturing part of his shoulder and neck. Another was just dirt with a glimpse of my boot. A wide shot depicted us standing about 15 feet apart, facing opposite directions. Kevin adjusting his backpack, me with hands on my hips. The image looked like it was taken from above, but there was no elevated ground nearby. No shadows suggested a photographer. I checked my phone and found 3 similar photos, even less clear. The last one showed Kevin walking ahead on a trail that curved left through a narrow canyon, a path I was certain we hadn't traveled. We scrutinized the galleries, trying to make sense of it. The timestamps were consistent, but the content was impossible. We hadn't been moving, and our phones were untouched during that period. Kevin grew quiet, zooming into one of the sky shots. A small white smudge in the upper left corner caught our attention. Not quite lens flare, but an oddly shaped vertical oval. We attempted to recreate the shot, but nothing matched. Checking the photo metadata revealed another anomaly. The GPS tags were completely blank. Every other photo from our trip had precise coordinates, but these mysterious images showed nothing. We hiked back quietly after the strange moment, our silence heavy with unease. About halfway to the car, I checked my Garmin and noticed we were half a mile east of our expected location. The terrain looked identical, but something felt off when I tried to match our trail to the map. The scrub patterns and rock layout seemed close, yet not quite right. When we reached the car, everything seemed normal. The phone worked, the car started without issue, and no new photos appeared unusual. Later that night, Kevin called with more strange details. He couldn't upload the weird photos to his laptop, though they opened fine on his phone. Attempts to email the images failed repeatedly, attachments wouldn't send, and screenshots caused messaging apps to crash. The following weekend, we returned to the trailhead, determined to understand what happened. We hiked the same path, searching for the exact spot, but nothing looked precisely as it had before. The ridge and wash were there, but something felt different. Only the GPS trail confirmed we hadn't deviated from our original route. Those photos remain on my phone. I've stopped trying to send them. Sometimes I look at the image of us standing apart, with no one else in the frame. I can't recall positioning ourselves like that, and I have no idea who took the picture. That night, I was on my porch with a beer, in a scene familiar from countless previous us evenings. It was one of those perfectly still nights. No wind, no insects, just my old dog shifting on the wooden boards and the gentle creak of the rocking chair. I've always enjoyed stargazing, not in some profound way, but for the simple calm it brings. Living in the countryside means no light pollution, so on good nights, the entire sky spreads out with the Milky Way's faint edge visible. This was one of those nights, crisp, clean, and comfortable. No porch light, just me zoning out, watching satellites crawl slowly overhead. Night was clear, everything moving in its usual way. The stars hung steady, planes blinking their red and white lights high overhead. I know the difference between normal sky activity and something strange, but something felt off. A star to the left, just above the horizon, caught my attention. Bright, but not the brightest. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed it was moving. Not quickly, but drifting slowly from right to left across the sky. It wasn't climbing or descending, just sliding sideways. Unlike other stars, this one didn't twinkle. Instead, it held a steady, cold glow like a distant headlight, pale white. I watched for a full minute, trying to understand what I was seeing. Maybe a satellite at an odd angle? Perhaps a high-altitude weather balloon? But there was no shape, no color variation, no blinking, just a small white dot moving where nothing should move. Suddenly it stopped. Not a gradual slowdown, but an instant halt, like a cursor pausing on a screen. It hovered for about 10 seconds, then vanished. Not faded, but blinked out completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks. Scanning the area revealed nothing, just black sky and twinkling stars. No clouds, no light, no sound. I waited, but it didn't return. When I stood and stretched, the silence struck me. The dog sat motionless, ears forward, staring intently into the dark field beyond the fence. I called him, but he didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on something invisible to me. Initially, I saw only tall grass with a slight movement, but looking closer, I realized the grass wasn't swaying naturally. Something seemed to be moving beneath the surface. No sound of footsteps or rustling, just a faint, systematic disturbance. I grabbed the flashlight from the table and switched it on. The beam didn't reach far, but illuminated enough to make me wonder what might be lurking just beyond the light's edge. I swept the flashlight across the first 20 feet of the yard. The grass looked normal under the beam, but then something caught my eye near the fence. A quick movement, like a head or shoulder dropping low. The dog barked once, sharp and loud, then fell silent. I kept the light trained on that spot, waiting. Nothing appeared. No animals, no people, just emptiness. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes watching. Something felt fundamentally wrong. Not scary, exactly, but off, like the world's timing had been slightly disrupted. Only then did I notice a low buzzing sound. It wasn't like an engine, more like a phone vibrating softly on a table. Barely perceptible, but once heard, impossible to ignore. The dog eventually relaxed, laying back down as if nothing had happened. I turned off the flashlight and sat, holding my beer, watching the stars. The next night, curiosity drew me back to the porch. Same setup, same time, same clear sky. I stared at the spot where the strange movement had occurred, but nothing unusual appeared. After an hour, I gave up and headed inside. Just as I shut the door, a sound caught my attention. A soft scraping, like something brushing against the house, almost like a branch dragging across the siding. It came again, this time closer to the kitchen window. I approached carefully, keeping the lights off, and pulled the curtain back slightly. Nothing. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The dog followed, tail down, ears back. He didn't bark, just stayed close, staring toward the back of the house. I walked around, sweeping my flashlight across the wall and grass. No animal tracks, no broken branches, no wind. Then, on the far side of the house, something stopped me. A perfect circle, about 4 feet across, where the grass was flattened, not burnt or discolored, just pressed down as if something heavy had settled there. I touched the ground. The soil wasn't wet, but impossibly cold compared to the surrounding air. Unnerved, I backed away, scanning the area with my light. The night was cold, but not freezing when Jake and I were out on the lake, our usual weekend escape. We'd anchored the little motorboat far from shore, fishing lines in the water, waiting for a bite. Stars blazed overhead, so bright they seemed almost touchable, and the water was like glass, completely still. We sat on the back bench, each holding a fishing rod, bundled in our jackets. Only occasional sounds broke the silence, a bobber moving, a soft fish nibble, the boat's gentle creaking. Jake went quiet suddenly, staring behind the boat. I followed his gaze, wondering if he'd spotted something, maybe a jumping fish or a bird. Then we heard it, a splash. Sudden and heavy, like something massive had hit the water right behind us. But here's the weird part. No ripple spread out. Nothing. In the weeks that followed, strange things kept happening. One night, my digital clock started flashing at 3:42 a.m., reset for no reason. The house was otherwise normal, fridge humming, porch light on. My dog stood alert at the back door, staring into darkness. When I flipped on the porch light and looked out, I saw a shape at the tree line's edge, tall, still, with no discernible features. It stepped back and vanished behind the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I've been watching the sky more since then. I haven't told many people about what happened. Those I did tell didn't know what to say, and honestly, neither do I. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't drunk. It just happened. The star that blinked out, the grass movement, the buzzing, none of it made sense. For a week, I avoided the porch. Something didn't feel right. Through the window, I'd sometimes scan the sky, but that strange light never reappeared. The lake was eerily silent. Jake and I sat motionless, straining to understand the weird splash noise that seemed to come from nowhere. No movement disturbed the water's surface. It remained perfectly smooth. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked. I nodded, feeling uneasy. We waited, expecting something to break the stillness. Then came a low, steady droning sound from beneath the boat. This wasn't like any engine noise or natural ambient sound. It was a deep, constant vibration you could feel through your bones. The buzz remained consistent, neither growing louder nor softer. We said little, just listening. The sound continued for several minutes, seeming to emanate directly underneath us. Darkness surrounded us, the moon hidden behind clouds, the shoreline invisible beyond the tree line. Jake's small flashlight provided the only illumination, but when I swept it across the water, nothing revealed itself. Suddenly the droning stopped. No gradual fade, just an abrupt cutoff. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. I told Jake we needed to head back, and he didn't argue. As we turned, the water remained unnaturally still. No wake followed the motor, no splashes disturbed the surface. It was like the lake was holding its breath. Midway back, Jake broke the silence. "Do you feel something strange?" I understood exactly. It wasn't pure fear, but a sense of something watching, something just beneath the surface, simultaneously wanting to remain hidden and to be acknowledged. Out in the flat, dry country west of Marfa, Texas, I was camping on BLM land. Scrub brush and hard pan dirt stretched as far as I could see. This was my turf. I'd done a dozen solo camping trips like this before, mostly in the desert. No cell service, no noise, no lights. Just me and my one-man tent with a mesh roof perfect for stargazing. That night started like any other, windy at sundown, then calm after dark. I stayed up watching the sky, the Milky Way blazing overhead and a couple meteors streaking by. The silence was remarkable. No bugs, no coyotes, nothing moving. Just me and the wind. I fell asleep around 11, my satellite phone tucked away to save battery. When I woke up later, I couldn't say exactly when. The darkness was absolute, the kind that feels heavy, pressing against your eyes. At first, nothing seemed wrong, just an unusual stillness. Then I realized it was too quiet, unnaturally quiet. In the desert, you always hear something, an owl, a distant dog, your own breathing. But this was different, like someone had muffled the entire world. No breeze, no rustle from the brush, complete silence. Later, driving home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Something about that night lingered. The memory of that impossible silence stuck with me, vibrating just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I haven't been back to that spot since, not sure I want to. I unzipped the tent and clicked on my flashlight. The beam swept across the ground outside, and I stopped cold. There, centered right on my tent, was a perfect circle about 20 feet across. The ground inside looked darker, like something had burned it away completely. Scrub grass and brush were gone, leaving only bare, blackened earth. But there was no heat, no smell, nothing to suggest what had happened. I touched the ground. It was cold and packed hard, as if whatever had occurred had simply erased everything. Standing up, I slowly turned, searching for any sign, footprints, tracks, anything. Nothing. The surrounding desert remained untouched, with my truck just a distant shadow to the east. Walking to the ring's edge, I noticed how sharp the line was, almost as if drawn with a precise instrument. One side showed the typical desert landscape, pale dirt, thorny brush, scattered rocks. The other side was just a smooth, dark patch. It didn't make sense. A fire would have left traces, smoke, ash, something. But the night air was completely empty. No ozone, no scent, just dry desert stillness. I stood scanning the sky. No clouds, no planes, no satellites, just unmoving stars. The longer I looked, the more unnatural the stillness felt. Something seemed wrong, but I couldn't explain what. Eventually, the cold drove me back into the tent. I zipped up, but sleep was impossible. I lay there, flashlight in hand, listening to the silence and watching the mesh ceiling. Near dawn, a faint humming started, low and deep, like a distant generator. It grew slightly louder, then gradually faded, not passing by but seeming to wind down before disappearing completely. When sunrise came, I examined the circle again. The burn pattern looked artificial, almost stamped on, with an impossibly clean edge. I packed quickly, not stopping for food or coffee, just shoving everything into my pack and hiking out. The entire time, I kept glancing back, though I couldn't say why. At my truck, I checked the tires and sat for a few minutes, staring at the empty desert. No vehicles, no trails, nothing to explain what I'd witnessed. I'd driven that stretch of Highway 95 south of Tonopah more times than I could count. Back when I ran deliveries, I'd sometimes sleep in the truck instead of finding a room. The road near the test range always felt eerie, even on normal nights. It's a desert that feels empty in a way that's hard to describe. You can drive for hours without seeing a jai. As station, this particular night was just past midnight. I'd left El Eli after a late dinner with my cousin and was heading to Bay, not in any rush. The road was quiet, no other cars around, with only my dash lights and high beams cutting through the darkness. I was sipping warm water and half listening to a fuzzy AM station when I saw them. 3 lights, bright white points, maybe 30 degrees up in the sky. At first, I thought they were aircraft flying in formation, not unusual given the military activity in the area. They moved slowly, forming a perfect, equidistant triangle. Something felt off. I expected them to blink, bank, or make some engine noise. But there was nothing, no sound, just solid white lights. I turned off the radio and cracked the window, trying to hear something. Wind, jets, anything. But there was only the sound of tires on pavement. Weeks later, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. I checked my gear and noticed my compass was strange. It kept drifting, refusing to settle, even when I compared it to my phone and another compass. Who would I even report this to? I went back to the spot 3 weeks after that night, in the middle of the day. The circle I'd seen was gone. The earth was dry and cracked like the rest of the desert, with a few green shoots emerging. Nothing looked burned, but the brush hadn't grown back in the ring. It was like the land didn't remember what was supposed to be there. I found a cheap motel in Alpine and stayed 2 nights, trying to make sense of everything. But some experiences defy explanation. I was driving down a quiet road when something strange caught my eye. 3 lights hung in the sky, perfectly still. Unlike commercial planes that typically drift or wobble, these were rock steady in a tight triangle formation. For at least 5 minutes, I kept looking up. They weren't following the road exactly, but stayed roughly parallel to my route. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowed down to get a better view. Eventually, I pulled over onto the shoulder and killed the engine. Complete silence surrounded me. When I stepped out of the truck, the lights were still there, maybe slightly lower now. Suddenly, without warning, they split up. Each light darted off in a completely different direction. One left, one up, one straight back. The movement was so fast I could barely track it. No gradual curves, just instant, sharp movements. Then they were gone. I stood there, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe some kind of experimental aircraft or drones, but I'd never witnessed anything move like that, especially without a sound. When I turned back toward my truck, they had returned. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That's what really unnerved me. I hadn't seen them return. I was looking directly at that part of the sky, and they were just suddenly back, as if they'd never left. I got back in the truck and drove, not speeding, but definitely wanting to put some distance between myself and whatever those lights were. I kept checking my mirrors and glancing up through the windshield. The lights remained stationary, seeming to track me without getting closer or fading away. Then, just as abruptly as before, they blinked off, not moving, just vanishing like someone flipped a switch. About 10 minutes later, something else weird happened. My dash clock reset, flickering out and then returning with an incorrect time of 4:11 a.m. My odometer had also reset, as if I'd just started driving. This isn't normal behavior for a vehicle in motion. I arrived in Bay around 1:30 and checked into a small motel across from the gas station. The desk clerk gave me a strange look, commenting that I appeared pale. I brushed it off, saying I'd had a long drive. In my room, I sat on the bed with the TV muted, replaying the entire experience in my mind. Sleep didn't come until the sky began to lighten, and even then, it felt more like a restless daze than actual rest. 2 weeks earlier, I'd set up trail cameras near Wolf Hollow Ridge, close to the county line. This remote part of the forest attracts me precisely because it sees so little human activity. With 3 cameras positioned around a salt lick beside an old logging road, I was tracking wildlife movement during early October when leaves were just starting to dry and fall. The temperature had dropped below freezing some nights, making it an ideal time to monitor animal patterns. I was using a Browning Recon Force camera that captures motion in 10-second clips. Most footage was predictable. Raccoons investigating the salt lick, a few does moving at dusk, a bobcat sniffing near a stump where I'd left sardines as bait. Then something odd caught my attention. During a stretch of seemingly empty frames, a timestamp of 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday showed an unusually high temperature of 61 degrees, while other clips that night registered around 35 to 36 degrees. When I examined the clip, 5 deer stood frozen mid-movement in an unnaturally bright scene. Their positioning was bizarre. Each deer was caught in an unnatural pose, one with a front hoof suspended midair, another with its head tilted, tongue barely visible. They weren't in a typical alert stance, weren't clustered together as they would be if startled. Instead, they appeared suspended in a moment of absolute stillness. What truly unnerved me was the lighting. The entire clearing was illuminated like midday, but with no discernible light source. The glow seemed to emanate from within the deer, the stump, the salt lick, everything appearing to radiate light from its core. Shadows were absent or distorted in a way that defied explanation. Suspecting a technical glitch, I checked the surrounding frames. The images immediately before and after were completely normal. Dark, grainy and static. In the subsequent frame, the deer had vanished without a trace, leaving no evidence of movement or disturbance. I was checking the camera footage when things got weird. Two cameras, set up about 40 yards apart in a clearing, just stopped recording without warning. The east camera cut out at 316642, no error messages, and picked up again at 31910 with no deer or signs of disturbance. The west camera had a single corrupted file at 317 that wouldn't open. Spooked enough, I drove back to the clearing that same afternoon with my dog Bramble, an old shepherd mix who isn't easily rattled. The drive took about an hour, and I arrived late in the day. I parked at the edge of the access road and hiked in. The clearing looked ordinary at first, a mostly gone salt lick stomped down by hooves with fresh scat and torn up ground. The cameras were still mounted with good batteries, but Bramble wouldn't enter the clearing. She stopped about 10 feet from the edge, hackles raised, nose to the wind, just staring. No growling, no cowering, just frozen. I called her twice, but she wouldn't move, so I walked in alone. Initially, everything seemed normal. Birds chirped, wind rustled through the trees. I checked each camera, pulling the cards and replacing batteries even though they were half full. Walking the perimeter, I noticed something odd. An old white pine about 30 yards south of the salt lick had a strange patch on its trunk. The bark was scorched but not burned, discolored as if exposed to intense heat for just seconds. No scorch marks surrounded the tree. No evidence of a lightning strike, just that one peculiar patch. Something told me not to touch it. I stood listening and then heard it. Fast movement through the brush, not loud, but like something big passing quickly. They didn't walk out of frame, they simply vanished. I'd checked the timestamp, 10 seconds. This wasn't a glitch. Real data bubble, as recorded, unlike anything I'd seen before. Back home that night, I plugged in the memory card from the west-facing camera, the one with the corrupted file. Using a different program, I tried to open it again. This time, the video played, but it was just a single static frame. No movement. I boosted the contrast and saw a figure, not quite a person or an animal, but a shape. It looked like a tall, thin, barely formed vertical smudge, standing just beyond the IR's reach at the edge of the frame, watching. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept checking the windows, and Bramble wouldn't leave my side. Every time I moved, she followed. Every little creak in the floor made her tense. The next day, I returned to the clearing in the middle of the afternoon, carrying a Geiger counter borrowed from a chemistry teacher friend. I didn't expect much, but when I waved it over the scorched tree trunk, it ticked slightly higher than baseline. Not alarmingly so, just a bit elevated. The reading dropped back to normal about 2 feet above and below the mark. I pulled all 3 cameras and haven't reinstalled them since. The memory cards now sit in a drawer. Occasionally, I revisit that single frame of the deer caught in perfect motion, lit up like mannequins in a showroom. It still doesn't make sense. It began on a quiet night outside Holbrook, Arizona, where Highway 377 branches off from 277. I was driving north, hauling a flatbed of industrial piping toward Farmington. The desert was cold, the sky clear, with nothing but open road and the occasional tumbling tumbleweed. This highway sees little traffic after midnight, especially in late November. About 45 minutes past the last gas station, I hadn't seen a single car for miles, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the engine's low hum. While sipping lukewarm gas station coffee, I noticed something in my rearview mirror, a single headlight. Not close, but visible, steady and low to the ground. My first thought was a motorcycle, maybe a dirt bike with a broken beam. But who rides out here in the middle of the night? Just out of sight, I turned around, half expecting a deer or bear. Nothing was there. Bramble stood frozen at the tree line. I called her, and we left. The headlights had been trailing me, constant and unwavering. After about 10 minutes, I eased off the gas, not slamming the brakes, just slowing down to see if it would catch up. The headlights matched my pace, maintaining the same distance. I tapped my brakes a few times, but got no response. I pulled off at a gravel runoff with a faded cattle gate and a rusted no trespassing sign. Juno, my red-boned coonhound, lifted her head from the passenger seat, gave me a slow blink, and settled back down. I watched the mirror, but nothing came around the bend. I waited around 5 minutes. No engine noise, no light. Stepping out, I let the door cack shut and walked toward the road, listening. The wind rustled through low brush, and my engine's metal ticked as it cooled. Walking around to the truck's back, I saw only empty black top disappearing into darkness. I climbed back in and drove off, chalking it up to a distance trick. Maybe the driver had turned somewhere. 20 minutes later, the headlight reappeared. Same position, same distance. This time I studied it closely. It never bobbed or wavered like a motorcycle would. Instead, it moved smoothly, almost unnaturally, as if gliding. I flipped on the CB, seeking other nearby drivers, but found only static and silence. Passing a maintenance turnout, I stopped again, leaving the engine running. The moment I hit the brakes, the light vanished. I ran back on foot about 100 yards. Juno followed, sniffing the air with a stiff tail and raised ears. Standing there, I heard nothing, just dry air and distant power line buzz. Returning to the truck, I checked the road for tire marks. Recent rain had left soft shoulder patches, but no tracks were visible, not even my own. Driving on, I gripped the wheel tighter than I'd like to admit, eyes fixed on the mirror. Nothing appeared. Near a cluster of bushes, half an hour later, I saw it again. One light, same exact spot, same height. This time I didn't stop. I stared for maybe 10 minutes straight, barely blinking. The night was dark and something felt off. I was driving, Juno beside me, whining in a way she rarely does. Her eyes kept darting to the side window, like she was expecting something. I decided to do something unusual. I hit the brakes hard and killed the headlights, plunging everything into pitch black. When my eyes adjusted, a headlight was still behind me. It was unnaturally bright, with no glow spreading around it. No shine on the asphalt, no beam, just a sharp, white point. Then suddenly it vanished. Not a fade, not a gradual dip, just gone. My heart raced in the darkness. Minutes passed. I eventually turned the lights back on, pulled onto the road, and continued driving. No more headlight appeared. I reached Farmington just after 4 a.m., dropped off the trailer, and went to my usual resting spot. Looking up, the sky was crystal clear, stars scattered like powdered sugar across black glass. Far to the east, higher than any plane I'd seen in 30 years of driving, a faint white dot hovered, then shot left with incredible speed. Just a blur, then nothing. Juno barked once, then settled by the wheel well as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that morning, just sat in the cab, engine running, waiting for sunrise. Back home, the motion light had been triggering at 3:17 a.m. for 3 consecutive nights. It was the sensor above the kitchen window, illuminating a 60-foot patch of overgrown grass in pale yellow light. Beyond that lay scrub brush, old fence posts, and half an acre of open space before the tree line. My property spans about 3 acres in southeastern Missouri, where I moved 4 years ago after my divorce, seeking quiet. I only knew the light had gone off because Boone had jumped into the bathtub again, his typical response to anything that spooks him. Thunder, gunshots, even a wind chime could send him there, curled up and shaking. Boone's a red-boned coonhound mix, neither young nor old, who usually isn't easily frightened. He typically barks at coyotes and patrols the property. 3 nights now, Boone bolts to the bathroom at exactly 3:17, silent as a ghost. The first night, I brushed it off as a raccoon and went out with my flashlight, checking the yard and barn. Nothing unusual. The second night, I was already half awake when he took off. I watched the clock. 3:17, precise as a metronome. More annoyed than worried, I peered out the kitchen window. The yard looked frozen, like a painting. No movement, no rustling, not even the grass stirring in the breeze. The third night followed the same pattern. Boone scrambled off the bed and headed straight for the tub. This time I didn't rush. I lay still, listening. The house was utterly silent except for his nails clicking on the tile. Around 3:25, I finally got up and went to the window. The motion light was barely on, flickering like it was about to shut off. As my eyes adjusted, something caught my attention. A scarecrow. Except I don't own a scarecrow. About 20 feet past the light's edge, where brightness melts into shadow, stood a figure. Too thin to be human, too rigid to be natural. No discernible limbs, just a vertical shape like a post or a motionless person with arms at their sides. I blinked and it vanished. Was it a fence post catching the light oddly? My reflection? To be sure, I stepped onto the porch without a flashlight, letting my eyes readjust. The field was empty. The next morning I walked out with Boone, who seemed reluctant. I had to leash him, and then, he dragged behind. The grass was slightly flattened in spots, but no clear signs of disturbance. No prints, no broken stalks, no burn marks, just grass. But when I looked back at the house from where I'd seen the figure, something struck me. From that spot, you can only see the light's glow, not the light itself. The kitchen was dark, just me with a cold cup of coffee and Boone curled up on the rug by the fridge. I watched the digital clock above the stove intently. 3:10, 3:15. At 3:17, the light clicked on. No sound, no buzz, just a soft pop as the bulb came to life. Boone's reaction was immediate. His ears flattened, tail dropping low, but he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the window. I stood carefully, avoiding scraping the chair legs, and moved to the sink to peek outside. Something was in the field, closer than before, maybe 10 feet from the light's edge. That thin shape stood motionless, not swaying with the surrounding grass. It was watching, I was certain. When I opened the back door, Boone growled, a sound I'd only heard once before when a neighbor's pit bull invaded our yard. He didn't follow me out. On the porch, flashlight in hand, I waited for my eyes to adjust before flipping it on and pointing directly at the spot. Nothing. The figure had vanished. But the grass was moving, not as if something had walked through, but like something heavy had just lifted off, rippling outward in slow waves. No wind, just motion. My legs wouldn't move. I wanted to walk out there, but something held me back. After 30 seconds, the light timed out and the yard went dark. I backed into the house and locked the door. Boone was already in the tub. The next morning, I discovered 3 small holes in the field where the shape had been. Each was quarter-sized, perfectly round, spaced about 2 feet apart in a triangle formation. They were shallow, maybe 5 inches deep, but unnervingly clean. No dirt around the edges, as if something had simply pressed through the surface. I covered the area with an old barn tarp. I can't explain why. That was last week. The light hasn't come on since, but Boone still sleeps in the bathroom every night. When I call him to bed, he just looks at me and slinks away, like he knows something I don't. I worked as a satellite technician for a mid-size aerospace company in Colorado Springs, mostly doing shift work in a windowless control room packed with screens, blinking lights, and way too much coffee. My job was pretty straightforward. Monitor satellite telemetry, check for anomalies, and keep everything online and on track. Nothing glamorous. Mostly, it was just staring at radar blips and data points for hours. About 6 months into the job, something strange started happening. On our monitoring software, an object would pop up that didn't belong. It wasn't part of any known satellite constellation or debris field, and it definitely wasn't moving like a normal satellite. Satellites follow predictable orbits, but this thing? It would appear at random positions on the screen, never twice in the same spot. Sometimes it was close to the horizon, sometimes far overhead, and it wasn't orbiting in any way that made sense to me or my team. At first, I thought it was a glitch, maybe some radar interference or a software bug. But every time it appeared, it was on a different scan, in a different spot, with no discernible pattern. What made it even more unsettling was how quickly it vanished. The monitoring system refreshed every few minutes, but this thing disappeared before the next scan. I couldn't lock onto it or gather any data, just a brief blip that appeared and then was gone. I tried talking to my coworkers, mentioning it casually, but no one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and just brushed it off. My supervisor waved it away as sensor noise or space junk. Then one night, during a late shift, working solo as usual, it showed up again. The control room was silent except for the air system's hum and occasional status alert beeps. Near the edge of coverage, I saw it, small, round, and bright enough to immediately catch my eye. I zoomed in on the radar display. The coordinates flashed. It was over the southwestern US, but not following any known orbit path. I tapped the track sensor. I haven't walked out into the field after dark since, and I haven't been able to sleep through 3:17 a.m. since that night. I leaned forward, eyes glued to the monitor, my finger hovering over the button. The system started its countdown. Refresh in 60 seconds. Right before the update, something strange happened. The blip shifted, but not smoothly like a satellite moving along its expected path. Instead, it seemed to jump and then vanished completely. Checking the logs revealed nothing. No satellite or object matched this signature, and the area where it last appeared was mostly empty desert. For weeks, I obsessively scanned every feed, waiting for its return. And return it did, but always differently. No pattern, no consistency, just fleeting glimpses that disappeared too quickly to fully understand. I tried talking to my supervisor about these occurrences. They dismissed my concerns, calling them interference or glitches. But something felt off. This wasn't normal. One night, I decided to record the radar feed with my phone, hoping to capture proof of what I was seeing. The video showed exactly what I'd observed, a brief blip appearing and vanishing. But something else was weird. The screen's timestamp would jump backwards by about 30 seconds, as if the system briefly reset itself. This made no sense, especially given the strict logging protocols of the system I worked with. Strange things started happening around me. My home Wi-Fi cut out randomly. My phone battery drained unusually fast. Apps behaved oddly, with notifications sometimes appearing seconds before the actual messages. A month after first noticing the object, I took my dog Bixby for a late-night walk. The winter air was crisp, creating small clouds with each breath. Stars shone brightly overhead. While checking my satellite tracking app, I noticed something unusual. A faint, silent light moved slowly across the sky, different from any plane or satellite I'd seen before. No flashing, no sound. Bixby suddenly tensed, letting out a low growl. He stared intently at the sky, ignoring my attempts to calm him. Then, just like the radar blip, the light vanished. During my night shift, the tracking system began to glitch in strange ways. At first, I thought I was just exhausted, seeing things that weren't really there. But then it happened again, an object appearing in impossible locations, flickering on the screen. My coworkers didn't seem concerned. Night shifts are long and monotonous, so most welcomed anything that broke the tedium. But I couldn't shake the feeling something unusual was happening. One evening, the system showed two blips at opposite ends of the coverage area. When I zoomed in, they pulsed faintly, almost like signals. Then suddenly, everything froze. The blips vanished, and my workstation screen went dark before slowly rebooting. When the system came back online, I noticed something odd, a 5-minute gap in the log files. I reported it, but nobody saw anything suspicious. Management dismissed it as a minor power surge. That night, driving home, fog blurred the streetlights. I kept looking up, wondering about what I'd seen. When I pulled into my driveway, my porch light was flickering. My dog Bixby started barking urgently the moment I arrived. Inside, I checked my tracking app. It was frozen on a blank screen. Something felt wrong, like I was being watched. But I knew my family would never understand, so I kept silent. Days later, the object reappeared on the scans. This time, I tried to alert my supervisor using the emergency button. A calm, clipped voice came through the speaker. "Technician, cease tracking unknown objects. Continue monitoring only registered satellites." After that, I stopped trying to investigate. The blips kept appearing in different locations, always vanishing before anyone else could verify them. I kept my head down and did my job. But late at night, when I'm alone, I still wonder. The night was cool and crisp, typical of an autumn evening in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was driving home after a late hospital shift, the highway mostly empty with trees barely visible in my headlights. Low-hanging clouds obscured the moon, and a thin fog softened the road's edges. About halfway through my drive, something unusual caught my eye. At first, I thought the fog was playing tricks, but then the sky began to change. Swirling bands of green and blue light started dancing overhead, pulsing with an almost rhythmic quality. Unlike the northern lights or typical storm displays, this was different, quieter, more mysterious. I pulled over to the shoulder, stepped out into the cold air. Fog curled around my boots as I stared upward. The sky seemed alive, electric and hypnotic. No thunder, no crackling, just an eerie, silent light show. When I tried to record it on my phone, the screen flickered, and the camera refused to focus properly. As quickly as it appeared, the light faded, melting away like smoke. The sky returned to its normal state, with faint stars barely visible through the mist. I got back in the car, thinking about calling my brother but hesitating. He'd probably dismiss it as some drone display or trick of airplane lights. 20 minutes later, pulling into my driveway, I noticed something strange on my windshield. What I initially thought was a smear of dirt was actually something etched into the glass on the driver's side. After wiping it with my sleeve, the message became clear. Look up less. A faint flicker on the radar catches my attention, and the unsettling feeling of being watched lingers. The black sedan first caught my attention one quiet night. It was parked about 50 yards down the street, engine humming softly, but no one inside. Just moments before, I'd discovered a fresh message carved into my windshield, sharp and clear, as if someone had just etched it moments ago. I stood on my porch, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of prank? The car remained motionless, seemingly waiting. Not wanting to investigate, I went inside and locked the door. The next morning, I mentioned the strange incident to my neighbors. Nobody had seen anything, and the police were dismissive. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the black car became a recurring mystery. It would appear down the street, always running but empty. Sometimes it would vanish when I looked away, only to reappear a block or two away. At night, I started hearing odd sounds, a low, faint humming like a distant transformer, always seeming to come from the woods behind my house. Then came the night that changed everything. Around 3 a.m., a bright white light flooded my bedroom. This wasn't street light or headlight glow. It was pure, steady, making the room as bright as midday. When I looked outside, the street was empty. The black car had disappeared. Dressed and nervous, I went outside. Thick fog hung low around the trees, and an eerie silence blanketed the street. Where the car had been, there was no trace. The next morning, I discovered another message, this time scratched into the bark of the old maple tree in my front yard. 2 words, stop watching. I kept this to myself. The handwriting was identical to the windshield message, jagged but deliberate. Something told me this was more than just a kid's prank. The Blue Ridge Mountains in early October were quiet that day as I hiked alone. Something felt off from the start. Later that afternoon, I drove around the neighborhood, asking neighbors if they'd noticed anything unusual. A few mentioned strange lights in the sky recently, unsure what to make of them. One neighbor shared that his dog had been acting strangely, barking at seemingly nothing for hours. A creeping sensation of being watched began to take hold. It wasn't like someone was physically hiding or spying, but more like an invisible presence just beyond my perception. Street lamp shadows seemed to move differently. Late at night, a faint glow would sometimes appear behind the tree line. I stopped going outside after dark. One night, I thought I heard footsteps in the leaves outside my back door. Peering through the blinds revealed only an empty yard, with wind-blown branches scratching against the window. My attempts to call a friend went unanswered. The next day, my fully charged phone was inexplicably dead, with a weak signal despite normally having full bars. Time began to feel distorted. Hours seemed to slip by irregularly, with the clock occasionally jumping ahead 10 or 15 minutes without explanation. I hesitated to call the police, not wanting to sound paranoid. Then came the night with the black car. Sitting on my porch and smoking, I watched a car roll slowly down the street. Its headlights were off, engine silent. It stopped directly in front of my house, sitting motionless for a long minute before finally pulling away into the fog. After that, the mysterious messages stopped and the strange lights vanished. I returned to my normal routines, but the feeling never completely disappeared. Sometimes while driving home late or sitting outside, that quiet, watching sensation would creep back. A soft pressure on the back of my neck. The windshield scratches have mostly faded. I still don't know who sent those messages or why the car kept appearing. The meaning behind the lights and the cryptic warning to look up less remains a mystery. But something was definitely there, something I can't fully explain or understand. I was out hiking, taking a week off to clear my head. The day was cool but sunny, probably mid-60s. I hadn't told many people about my trip. I just wanted some solitude in the woods. The trail I was on was one of the less traveled paths near Dotton Park, the kind where you might not see another person all day. About 6 miles in, I stopped at an overlook to have a snack and some water. The trees thinned out here, offering a clear view of the next ridge. maybe a mile away. As I sat on a flat rock, something caught my eye. A shiny object hovering just above the tree line. It wasn't moving at all, just hanging there like a piece of chrome suspended in midair. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but it was too far away to hear and looked larger than any drone I'd seen before. No rotors, no swaying, just a small silver dot reflecting sunlight like a mirror held at an angle. I stared at it, squinting. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been 30. I wasn't keeping track. When I looked down to grab a protein bar from my pack, it was just a quick glance. But when I looked back up, the object was completely gone. Not moved, just vanished. The sky where it had been was now empty. I scanned the ridge, thinking maybe it had dipped behind the trees, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed the silence. Before, there had been bird songs, chickadees, woodpeckers in the distance, the kind of background noise you typically stop noticing. Now it was dead still. No rustling, no bugs, just wind. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears. It wasn't that the animals seemed scared or had run off. It felt like something had hit mute on the entire forest. I stood up, turning slowly, trying to listen. No footsteps, no breeze through leaves, nothing. I'm not easily spooked, but this silence felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the reflection, maybe the birds were just taking a break. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After a few minutes, I packed up and decided to head back. I didn't take the longer loop I'd originally planned. Instead, I cut across a connector trail toward the trailhead. Something about that moment had changed my plans, though I couldn't quite explain why. I was hiking a trail, making steady progress. About an hour in, I stopped at a narrow switchback with a clear view back toward the ridge where I'd seen something earlier. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just pausing to catch my breath. A strange sensation caught my attention. A faint hum hung in the air, like distant power lines, except there were no power lines around. No buildings, no roads, just woods. The sound wasn't loud or constant. It felt more like a pressure behind my ears, coming and going every few seconds. Deeper than tinnitus, almost imperceptible. I held my breath to check if the sound was coming from me. It remained unchanged, low and pulsing, barely noticeable. Scanning the sky revealed nothing. No planes, no contrails, no birds. I realized I hadn't seen a single bird since the earlier overlook. Not even crows, which were usually everywhere. My pace quickened. The trail narrowed, overgrown in spots. I almost missed the turnoff where the sign had fallen. Doubling back cost me about 15 minutes. The hum continued, steady now, following me like a persistent headache just behind my skull. Near the parking lot, I encountered a couple, the first people I'd seen all day. They looked like serious hikers, fully equipped with packs and trekking poles. We exchanged brief hellos. I wanted to ask about any strange occurrences, but held back. I just wanted to get back. As I neared the trailhead, the hum vanished. No dramatic ending, just gone. Suddenly, the woods came back to life. A cardinal chirped nearby, and a squirrel darted across the path. The forest seemed to breathe again. The parking lot held only 2 cars, mine and an old Subaru, likely belonging to the hiking couple. I stood by my vehicle, letting my heart rate settle. Though I hadn't run, I felt unusually wired. My shirt was damp with sweat, despite the cool air. During the drive back to my rented cabin, my mind kept returning to that earlier sighting. The object had been unnaturally shiny, not metallic like a plane, not dull like a balloon. More like polished glass or chrome, something fundamentally out of place. I didn't share the experience immediately. I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was a drone. Maybe the silence was just a coincidence. Maybe I'd imagined the entire thing. But I've hiked that trail 5 or 6 times since, and I've never encountered that kind of silence again. Not once. Creek Airfield wasn't much to look at, just 2 runways, 4 hangars, and mostly weekend pilots in their Cessnas. Since getting laid off from Delta in '09, I'd been handling maintenance there, working alongside Ernie, who managed the fuel. That late September Wednesday was unusually quiet. The sun had already dipped behind the western ridge, and the air hung still after the wind died down. No planes had come or gone since 3 p.m., though the weather was perfectly fine, cool, dry, with just a hint of haze. I was finishing up my last task, sealing a nose strut on Jack Malay's 172. when something caught my attention. A low, pulsing hum started, like a diesel engine idling underwater. It was deep, not particularly loud, but the kind of sound you feel more than hear. It seemed to sit right in my chest. At first, I thought it might be a farm generator. Those old machines sometimes create weird sound waves that bounce off the hills. But this was different. The sound was coming from directly overhead. I stepped onto the tarmac and looked up. Nothing. The sky was empty. No clouds, no planes, not even a bird, just a pale sky turning orange near the horizon. The moment my boots touched the pavement, the sound vanished completely. No gradual fade, just absolute silence. The stillness was eerie. No wind, no bugs, just a quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. I walked around, checking behind the hangar and near the air compressor shed. Everything was silent. The next morning, Ernie mentioned the security lights had been triggered around 1 a.m. He suggested it might have been a coyote. But when I reviewed the security footage, something was off. Between 12:57 and 1:04, there were 7 minutes of pure black. Not static, not interference, just complete absence. Our old system usually catches everything, even rabbits hopping across the grass, but this segment was simply gone. I mentioned the sound to Ernie, but he brushed it off. Probably a military low pass, he suggested. Yet something didn't add up. Military aircraft leave traces, radar signals, contrails, something that heavy would create vibrations we'd feel in the hangars. That evening, I worked late again, losing track of time while fixing a wiring fault on an old Piper Cub. The skylights dimmed as sunset approached, and I realized it was past 7. When I stepped outside, the air was still and quiet. My thoughts drifted back to that strange hum. Looking up, I noticed something odd about the sky. A section directly above the airfield, maybe the size of a football field, was completely starless. Everywhere else was crystal clear, but this spot was just black. Not a shape, not a light, just an absence. The longer I stared, the more unsettling it became, like staring into a void where sky should be. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even cleaned my glasses. Nothing changed. Then that hum returned, not a sound, but a sensation deep in my chest. A slow, low thudding like a distant heartbeat. My ears felt strange, pressurized, similar to rapid altitude changes. No pain, just that muffled feeling when something's not quite right. I walked back to the hangar, and the moment I crossed the threshold, everything stopped. The hum vanished. My ears cleared instantly. I stood there, arms crossed, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. The next morning, Ernie arrived late. His dog had been acting strange all night, whining, pacing, refusing to settle. What struck me was his description of her constantly staring at the sky, growling at seemingly nothing. I kept quiet, not wanting to sound crazy. That afternoon, Brent flew in from Henderson to pick up some refurbished avionics. He was only there about 15 minutes, but something told me this day was far from ordinary. As the day wound down, I was sitting outside the hangar, lawn chair set up, thermos in hand. A colleague had just left after a strange comment about something in the sky. After he drove away, I walked to where he'd parked and looked up. There it was, a faint shimmer, barely visible, like a distortion in the atmosphere. You'd miss it if you weren't looking carefully. That night, I stayed until darkness fell. Around 8:45, I began to feel a familiar hum. It wasn't loud, but dense, as if the air itself was becoming thicker. The taxiway lights flickered once, then the hangar lights went completely dark. Total blackness surrounded me. My heart raced. I thought maybe the electrical grid was failing given the airfield's old infrastructure. Suddenly, the security floodlight on Hangar 1 blazed brilliantly for 3 seconds before snapping off. Then silence. I stood motionless, unsure how long. Eventually, the lights returned all at once. No hum, no flicker, just quiet. I packed up and left. Things seemed normal. About a week later, the weather station vendor called. The tech reported a localized pressure dip right above our GPS coordinates the previous Wednesday. A drop of 2.1 kilopascals, centered 300 feet above ground level, like a sudden absence of mass. He suggested it might be a sensor fault, but wanted to confirm. Since that night, I've changed. I don't stay past sunset. I don't fly. I avoid looking up unnecessarily. I focus on fixing what's broken. But sometimes, as dusk settles and the air grows still, I feel it again, a faint sensation, just for a moment. Something waiting, moving silently above. It all started when my dog woke me just after 5, whining at the foot of the bed. My dog woke me up early that morning, more restless than usual. When I opened the back door, she froze and refused to step outside. Something felt off immediately. The air carried a faint smell, not quite smoke, but sharp like burnt electrical wiring or melted plastic. Standing on the porch barefoot, I surveyed the yard and noticed something strange. A perfect circle of pitch-black dust covered about 10 feet in the center of the grass, with lighter streaks extending closer to the house. The porch steps had subtle dark smudges, as if someone with sooty shoes had walked up and vanished. I touched the powder. It was bone-dry, incredibly fine, and clung to my fingers like a delicate charcoal residue. No moisture, no grit, just pure black dust. The sky was overcast and unnaturally still. No birds sang, which struck me as eerie. My dog, typically brave, cowered behind the doorframe, behavior completely unlike her. Living in the suburbs, I knew there were no nearby factories or construction sites that could explain this material. If it had been from a fire, I'd expect ash flakes or a distinct odor. But this was different, too uniform, too precise, as if deliberately placed. Around 6 a.m., I snapped a few photos. The dust was barely visible unless I angled the camera just right, showing faint contrasts against the grass. I texted my friend Jenna, hoping she might recognize something similar. By 8:30, the yard had transformed completely. No trace remained. No black powder, no porch smudges, nothing. The grass looked perfectly normal, as if nothing had ever happened. My dog was acting strange, refusing to go outside or even drink from her outdoor bowl. Something had happened in the yard, but now all evidence had vanished. Earlier, I'd seen smudges on the porch steps that needed cleaning, but now they were completely gone. No burn marks, no smell, nothing. I checked the ground where I'd seen the strange marks, but it looked like ordinary grass. My phone still held the pictures I'd taken, including one with a clear boot print in the dust. When I tried to match my foot to the print, the ground appeared untouched, as if someone had meticulously cleaned every trace with tweezers. Sleep wasn't an option after that. I spent the night researching black powder in yards, finding only vague possibilities. Volcanic ash fallout seemed the closest match, but we weren't near any volcanic region. Other explanations like mildew, mold, or pollution didn't align with what I'd seen, and none explained how everything could disappear so quickly. Jenna suggested it might be a blown transformer or firework, recalling a similar incident during a storm. But we hadn't experienced any storms, and I hadn't heard any loud noises. My clocks were normal, and there were no power outages. Throughout the day, I kept checking the yard. It remained pristine. The dog eventually ventured out to pee, but only at the very edge of the porch, using the gravel. I walked barefoot across the grass, feeling nothing unusual, just cool and slightly damp in the shade. That night, I sat on the steps in darkness, waiting. The neighborhood was quiet. Distant cars passed, and wind chimes rang from a nearby house. But my yard remained completely still. No wind, no bugs, no movement. Even the trees stood motionless. Something felt off, though I couldn't quite explain what. I was solo hiking and camping on the Pine Ridge Trail, a stretch of woods a couple hours east of Asheville. Early September brought cool, clear weather, perfect for the fire I'd built the night before. Around 9 a.m., I left camp planning to hike a few miles to the overlook and back by afternoon. Rosie, my golden retriever mix, was tethered to a tree while I navigated a rocky slope to investigate something. I didn't expect to return and find everything arranged like some kind of weird ritual. A plane flew overhead, blinking slowly across the sky, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Just after 10, a quick light flicker caught my eye over the fence, like someone flashing a small mirror from a distance. I stood up, scanning for a flashlight or movement in the woods, but nothing returned. Days later, I showed the pictures to a friend who works in environmental testing. He suggested industrial dust blown from the highway, but something didn't feel right. The coverage was too clean, and its disappearance without wind or rain made no sense. Now I walk the yard occasionally, searching for any trace. The grass remains healthy, no discoloration, burn rings, or unusual growth. But the dog won't go near it. She stays on the patio or does her business out front. I haven't mentioned it to neighbors, unsure what I'd even say. I keep checking the pictures. They seem blurrier now, the black powder less distinct, but the boot print remains, same tread as my hiking boots. I haven't cleaned the porch, waiting to see if anything returns. The next morning, the dog barked sharply at the sliding door, not whining like before. When I checked, nothing was there. The yard looked unchanged, but she refused to go near the door for the rest of the day. I'm still watching, still wondering. I returned from a quick trip to a small stream around 11:30, only to find my campsite completely rearranged. Every single item was meticulously placed in a perfect circle. My backpack, tent poles, shoes, stove, and fuel canister. Rosie stood right in the center, looking confused and unsettled. Faint scorch marks darkened the grass beneath this strange arrangement. They weren't heavy burns, just a brittle discoloration like a barely lit campfire, but without any ash or smoke smell. At first, I thought other campers might have passed through, but there were no footprints, no trash, no signs of human presence. As I started gathering my belongings, something felt off. Each time I moved an item, Rosie would growl softly and stare intently into the surrounding trees. I scanned the woods carefully, finding nothing unusual. Then I noticed the silence, an unnatural quiet that was completely wrong for this trail. Normally, mornings here are filled with bird songs and rustling animals, but now everything was dead silent. Only occasional twig snaps broke the stillness, and those happened only when I moved. I packed up quickly, with Rosie staying close. The entire time, I felt watched, as if something lurked just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. But whenever I looked, nothing was there. The hike back was tense, with the eerie silence following me. Rosie remained alert, her ears pricked, muscles tense. At the trailhead parking lot, I checked my phone and was shocked to see it was nearly 3 p.m. I'd been gone about 4 hours, but it felt much longer, as if time itself was distorted. The weirdness continued at home when I unpacked and discovered a small patch of scorched brittle grass stuck to my water bottle case. It smelled faintly burnt, but I couldn't remember where it came from. It wasn't from the campsite, and I hadn't picked it up anywhere else. Rosie seemed exhausted, adding to the day's strange atmosphere. I'd been flying small single-engine planes since college, mostly for weekend trips or clearing my head. That Sunday in late September, I had the afternoon free and the weather looked perfect. I decided to take a short hop up north over the valley before sunset. Clear skies, light wind, visibility stretching for miles. I filed VFR and took off from Red Bluff around 4:40 p.m., planning a quick loop to Lake Shasta and back. About 30 minutes into the flight, I was cruising at 6,500 feet just west of Lawson. The air was smooth and radio chatter was light. I listened to NorCal approach, but not much was happening. The sun hung low just above the tree line, casting a soft orange glow on the clouds, that beautiful late summer light. That's when I noticed something above me, maybe a few hundred feet higher. Another aircraft seemed to be coming up from behind, slightly offset to my left. At first I thought it was a twin, maybe a Baron or a Piper Navajo with a narrow fuselage. The sun behind it made details hard to distinguish, but something about its flight pattern was odd. It wasn't passing me normally. The next day I went back to the campsite with my friend Tom, who knows the area well. We wanted to see if anything had changed. At the spot where I'd camped, faint scorch marks remained in the grass. Tom examined them closely and noted the pattern was strange. A rough circle with tiny arcs radiating out, almost like a symbol. He said it looked deliberate, but couldn't recognize it from any camping or survival signs. We took some photos, but on my phone, the marks were barely visible. Tom's pictures were blurry, with patches of light that flickered unpredictably. We agreed to keep quiet about it. Nobody wants to sound crazy. Since then, I've kept my dog Rosie close. Every time I'm in the woods now, I feel watched, not by animals, but something else. I can't explain what happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was arranged so precisely. It doesn't feel like a normal camping prank or mistake. Something just feels fundamentally wrong. My girlfriend was uneasy all night, pacing between the living room and bedroom. Her eyes were wide, scanning corners and shadows I couldn't see. Something had deeply unsettled her, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. I was flying along when something started pacing me. Slowing down slightly, I eased back on the throttle just to see what would happen. Whatever it was adjusted immediately, keeping the exact same relative distance. Not gaining, not falling back, just hovering up there. It was maybe 500 feet higher, possibly less. My engine was loud, but I couldn't hear anything from this object. I radioed in, unidentified traffic at 11 high, type unknown, altitude unverified. No response came from ATC or anyone on the frequency. Looking up again, the shape was strange. No visible wings like a normal aircraft would have. The body looked smooth, almost molded, with no rivets or joints. Its flight pattern was impossible. No attitude change, no roll, just perfect horizontal movement matching my every move. I watched intently, trying to understand. No wobbling, no yaw, no turbulence buffeting, just impossibly solid. I banked gently right, thinking maybe the sun was playing tricks. But as I turned, it shifted too. Same bank, same arc, staying high and left, perfectly mirrored. That's when I felt something was off. Not with the plane, instruments were solid, engine fine, but there was this pressure, like cabin pressure dropping, even though I wasn't climbing. My ears popped twice, though my altitude hadn't changed more than 50 feet. The radio started hissing softly, static underneath the squelch, even when I turned the volume down. Then it happened. In an instant, it flipped. Not a bank, not a bay roll, just a rotation. 1 second level above me, matching my heading. The next, nose down, tail up, defying gravity, standing still in midair, and then gone. No sound, no acceleration, no vapor trail, just vanished. I scanned the sky, turned in a wide circle, even climbed another 300 feet looking for anything. Contrail, reflection, movement, nothing. Just clouds above the orange sun and a completely empty sky. I keyed up again. NorCal approach, November 28th, Niner Echo. Visual contact with unknown traffic at approximately 6,700 feet. Southwest of Lassen, faded out of sight, no collision risk. I continued my VFR flight, expecting a routine journey. When I first reported my position, the initial response was delayed. After about 10 seconds, a different controller's voice asked me to repeat my transmission. When I did, they confirmed something unsettling. They had no primary or secondary radar contact in my area except for my own aircraft. I tried to dismiss the incident and complete my loop back, but unease crept in. During the descent, I constantly checked my mirrors and glanced out the side windows, anticipating something unexpected. The earlier movement haunted me. How unnaturally it had flipped, defying aerodynamic principles and everything I understood about flight. Around 6:10 p.m., with daylight still present, I landed normally. I parked my aircraft, secured it, and logged the flight. Technically, nothing unusual had occurred, so I didn't file any report. In fact, I didn't mention the experience to anyone for several days. Yet the encounter lingered. For weeks afterward, every time I flew, I found myself compulsively scanning the sky, watching for something following me. One thought persistently echoed: how did that unidentified object know my exact location? How precisely it had mimicked every subtle turn and minute change in my speed. I apologize, but the text you've provided appears to be an incomplete fragment or partial sentence. Could you please share the full script or passage that you'd like me to rewrite? I'll be happy to help you restructure the text while maintaining its original meaning once I have the complete text.